Chapter 276. A dozen or so shooting stars descended from the sky, illuminating the night sky. It was possible to clearly see those burning arrowheads at the very front. Nank's face was still indifferent and wooden, but her pupils rapidly contracted. Her two hands tightly gripped the hilt of her sword. She did not have time to slash her sword at Su Yorong, so she stabbed it into the night sky. Stabbing into the night sky was an action. If it was still, it would only be an image. However, her sword seemed to have stabbed into the night sky countless times. At the same time, it was also the combination of countless still images. Nank raised her sword high up, perpendicular to the night sky above her head. Her eyes stared at Su Yorong, who was several zhang away, but there were countless sword glows flashing around her body, forming an extremely perfect ball of light. There were countless fine marks on the surface of the ball of light. They were all swords. The dozen or so arrows turned into shooting stars and exploded on the ball of light between the swords. Muffled thunderous booms continuously exploded on the summit of Sunset Valley. Countless cracks appeared on the hard surface of the cliff beneath Nank's pair of dragon skin boots, and they were even deeper than before. Those arrows were all blocked by her sword and sent flying. However, this time they did not disappear into the night. Instead, as if they were intelligent, they attacked once again with the clear cries of the arrows. The dozen or so arrows turned into a sky full of arrows, continuously exploding towards Nank. Pa-pa-pa-pa. An incomparably concentrated sound rang out from the peak. These sounds were the crisp sounds of metal colliding. They were the strange sounds of sharpness and hardness scraping against each other, causing people's ears to ache. Countless sparks appeared on the peak of the cliff, and there were even sparks in lines. These were all the results of arrows and swords colliding. However, not a single arrow was able to approach Nank's body. Even those fleeting, faintly discernible sparks were unable to float into the ball of light formed by her swords. On the ground of the peak, there were marks made by arrows everywhere. Some were deep, some were shallow, and they were densely packed together. They were like the marks left behind by a torrential rain on the surface of the sand. She stared at Su Yorong outside of the sword glows. She raised her sword high up, as if she did not move at all. However, in every instant she sent out countless swords. Looking from Su Yorong's position, those slender sword shadows behind Nank formed a fan shape. It was like a peacock spreading its tail. Seeing the sparks flying everywhere on the peak of Sunset Valley and hearing those tiny sounds, the zither-playing old man was moved speechless. At this moment, Nank's mind was completely focused on the longsword. No matter how powerful Su Yorong's spiritual sense was, other than controlling the rain of arrows, it was very difficult for her to launch another attack. The situation seemed to have reached a stalemate. What truly moved the zither-playing old man was the screen that Nank's longsword had opened. Only now did he realize that Her Highness the Princess had actually reached this step. She was indeed worthy of being the strongest among the younger generation of the demon royal family. Cultivators that had cultivated to the star condensation realm had one major difference. They had their own domain. It was their own world, called the star domain. In the star field, no one could harm them unless the opponent had an overwhelming advantage in terms of cultivation and forcefully broke through. There was a similar saying in the demon race, but the personal domain possessed by the experts of the imperial family was not called star domain, but moon ring. Because of Nank's age, her strength was still insufficient, so she could not summon the complete moon ring. However, she had used an extremely perfect and flawless sword style to perfectly make up for the deficiency in her cultivation. The sword screen that had bloomed on the peak of Sunset Valley was her moon ring. At this point, the zither-playing old man was finally no longer worried about this battle. Because no matter how powerful Su Yorong's bloodline was, she was still limited by her own cultivation. So as long as she remained an ethereal opening, she would never be able to harm Nank. This meant that in this battle that occurred in the Garden of Zhou, Nank was in an invincible position. The zither-playing old man thought in shock. The military advisor must have known of this matter, which was why he had unhesitatingly given the heavy responsibility of killing Su Yorong to Her Highness. His Highness's plans were truly flawless. The zither-playing old man was no longer worried, but he had forgotten one thing: being undefeated was not equal to victory. Facing Nank, who had used her sword style to imitate the moon ring, Su Yorong's performance could be considered perfect. The perfect here was absolute perfection. Whether it was the frequency at which the rain of arrows fell or the angle of each arrow, it was all extremely perfect. Nank could only hold on with her sword screen, but she was unable to find any opportunity to counterattack. To the proud her, this was a fact that she could not accept. Her goal in coming to the Garden of Zhou was to defeat Su Yorong, to kill her. The clear sounds did not stop, the rain of arrows did not stop, and the sparks on the cliff continued to flicker. In the darkness even further away, those streaks of light were like scars. With time, they gradually faded away, but in the blink of an eye, there were many more scars. The extremely unpleasant sounds of friction and the extremely terrifying sounds of collisions resounded in Nank's ears. She stared at Su Yorong, her expression wooden, and her dull eyes gradually sharpened. Suddenly, she closed her eyes, and with a hint of madness, she gave a loud shout. Ah! With this shout, the sword glow around her became even brighter, and the energy of her sword suddenly increased by 30%. With a series of claps, her figure suddenly became illusory, and then became solid again. She passed through her own sword screen, and her sword stabbed straight at Su Yorong. She actually did not care about the rain of arrows. She condensed all her cultivation into a single sword, and wanted to cut down Su Yorong. Even if her sword landed, those streaks of light would still inevitably stab into her body. This battle had actually reached its most dangerous moment so quickly. The zither-playing old man's expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly stood up from the zither. For a demon princess to risk her life with this sword, just how powerful was it? Nank's sword had 2 rays of clear light. The 2 sword glows intersected and slashed at Su Yorong's face. The zither-playing old man's face paled slightly, and he shouted in shock, "Southern Cross Sword." In the human world, one could not see the demon moon. In the demon realm, one could see the starry sky above the heads of the humans, but because of their position or some other reason, the starry sky in the eyes of the demons was not a sky filled with stars, but 2 belts of stars like the Milky Way. These 2 rivers of stars intersected in the night sky, just like a cross. Compared to Xuelao City, the starry sky was in the south, so the demons called it the Southern Cross. The sword that Nank slashed at Su Yorong was divided into 2 streaks of starlight. It was the extremely famous Southern Cross sword of the demon realm. The zither-playing old man also knew that Princess Nank's longsword was the famous Southern Cross sword. One sword was the sword style, and the other was the body of the sword. Nank used the Southern Cross sword to execute the Southern Cross sword. The powerful sword intent pierced through the air, but before it even reached Su Yorong's body, countless tiny cracks could be heard in the distant night sky. A sliver of pain flashed across the zither-playing old man's pale face, and his body swayed. This was the sound of the void shattering. Soon after, in the distant plains at the foot of Sunset Valley, that strange suspended light also began to flicker. The light that was cast here was slightly deformed, proof that space was being twisted. Nank's sword had already reached the peak that the laws of the Garden of Zhou allowed, and was even about to cross that boundary. The 10-odd arrows transformed into streaks of light, piercing through the darkness at high speeds. To the naked eye, it was like a majestic rain of arrows. Nank released the moon ring and transformed the sword screen into a single sword. This was equivalent to exposing herself to this terrifying rain of arrows. If Su Yorong could receive this terrifying Southern Cross sword, then it would be Nank's turn to face the greatest danger. The problem was that the Southern Cross sword's power was so terrifying, and the Southern Cross sword in Nank's hand was an illustrious weapon of the demon domain. In the human world, it was completely qualified to be ranked on the tier of legendary weapons. Su Yorong only had a wooden bow in her hand, so how could she receive it? With the sound of a zither, the bowstring broke. The bowstring broke at the end, curling up like the pistil of a flower, and fell on Su Yorong's wrist. She gripped the bow and stabbed it into the cliff in front of her. With a muffled crack, the cliff suddenly shattered, and the longbow stabbed into the ground. It swayed in the night wind, as if it had become a tree. A loud bang resounded. The incomparably terrifying Southern Cross sword chopped at the longbow. This bow was very long, so it did not feel very sturdy. It was also clearly made of wood, but it still managed to block this sword. On the smooth cliff peak, this tree was assuredly lonely, just like the tree she had seen on the mountain path. The mountain path was an illusion. The tree she had seen was the tree she wanted to see. The tree she had seen on the mountain path was a wudong tree. The longbow now was also a wudong tree. This bow was originally a divine weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. The wudong was the powerful magical artifact of Holy Maiden Peak. In the tier of legendary weapons, it was ranked 31st and 32nd. Why did a magical artifact have two rankings? Because the wudong was not a single magical artifact, but two. Those arrows whistling through the night sky were the leaves of the wudong tree. They were called the wu arrows. The longbow in her hand was the sturdy trunk of the wudong tree. It was called the solitary tree. The wu arrows and the solitary tree. My sword, the solitary tree. This was a ruler's weapon. Unless one was a saint or a monarch, they could not use it. But Su Yorong could use it. In fact, only she had the ability to display the greatest power of this magical artifact. It was the same reason why the solitary tree she had seen on the mountain path was a wudong. She was a phoenix perched on a wudong. She was a natural ruler. The clear light was like a wave smashing against a reef, scattering in all directions. The collision of two powerful chis illuminated the peak of Sunset Valley, and also illuminated each other's eyes. Su Yorong looked at Nank with a tranquil expression. She did not say anything, but she was strong. The solitary tree had blocked the Southern Cross sword, but where were the wu arrows? The sound of air being torn apart rang out in the darkness. Countless arrows rained down on Nank. Nank's sword clashed against Su Yorong's longbow. How could she avoid this rain of arrows? Just like what was said before, if she could not end this battle with a single strike, then it was her turn to face absolute danger. Just at this moment, an unexpected scene appeared. Nank's two hands holding the hilt of her sword crisscrossed. One sword blocked Su Yorong's longbow, while the other swung out. The sword screen reappeared, completely blocking the 10-odd wu arrows. The Southern Cross sword was actually two swords, just like the wudong was two magical artifacts. Tonight, the peak of Sunset Valley was overflowing with light and color, and clear cries constantly rang out. This was an unimaginable battle. In terms of intensity, it definitely could not compare to the heaven-shaking ambush outside the Garden of Zhou that was rarely seen in 100 years, but it was even more mesmerizing. Just like the rumors said, whether it was in terms of cultivation or willpower, they were extremely similar. Even their weapons and techniques were very similar. Just as imagined, they had finally met and then fought. The phoenix and the peacock, the wudong and the Southern Cross sword. Who would obtain the final victory? If there was fate, then they were fated opponents. Anyone who saw the battle tonight would firmly believe it. If no one saw this battle, then it would be the regret of the entire continent. Fortunately, there was a spectator to this battle. Every wrinkle on the zither-playing old man's face expressed shock and admiration. It was not only for Nank, but also for Su Yorong. He had never seen such powerful bloodlines and battle prowess. Let alone the fact that they were still so young. The wu arrows met the sword screen, the Southern Cross sword met the solitary tree. Now, the battle on the cliff had once again entered a stalemate. It all depended on who could last until the end. The zither-playing old man was very clear on this point, so he stood up in admiration. A fair battle? It was just like how the demons did not believe in the tears of humans. That was a very hypocritical word, without any meaning. However, Nank glanced at him. Although it was only a glance out of the corner of her eye, it was still colder than snow. The demons did not believe in fairness or justice, but she believed in pride. As a result, the zither-playing old man retreated. The peak of Sunset Valley remained bright from beginning to end. It was the sparks from the friction between the arrow and the sword, the flowing light formed from the collision of the chi between the sword and the bow. Amidst the sparks and flowing light, the luster on Su Yorong's ordinary and delicate face grew brighter and brighter, calmer and calmer. It represented confidence. A dignified chi emanated from her white ceremonial robes, incomparably bright. Nank's gaze was still somewhat dull, but it grew fiercer and fiercer. Because it grew more and more focused, it grew colder and colder. Suddenly, a clear whistle burst out from her lips. That voice was somewhat immature, but it was incomparably proud. It symbolized unruly and haughty arrogance. It was a peacock that stood alone in the depths of a swamp. It looked at the hundreds of birds flying into the distance, and cast a disdainful glance. Noiselessly, a stream of blood flowed from her hands, covering the hilt of the Southern Cross sword. The blood that flowed from her was not red, because she was not human. However, it was not the green of ordinary demon blood either. Her blood was multicolored and incomparably mottled. This blood was not disgusting. On the contrary, it possessed a bewitching beauty. The stream of blood seemed very cold, like flowing ice. It slowly covered Nank's hands and the hilt, and then it began to burn. However, the flames also seemed to be cold. The icy flames began to fiercely burn on the Southern Cross sword. In just an instant, the Wudong bow was covered in a layer of ice and snow. A moment later, it actually produced several icicles. The place where the bow was connected to the cliff began to violently tremble, producing several cracks. It seemed as if it could not endure it any longer. Was this the true blood of the surpassing bird? Su Yorong silently pondered. Then, the tips of her brows slightly furrowed. It was not vigilance or unease, much less fear. Rather, it was a fear of pain that had begun prematurely. Bleeding really did hurt a little. She did not like pain, so she did not like this method of battle. However, since Nank had already extended an invitation to her, she could not refuse. This was because she disliked defeat and death even more. Because of the pain, her brows furrowed more and more tightly. She seemed rather pitiful, but her eyes grew brighter and brighter, her expression calmer and calmer. A stream of blood slowly flowed from her fingers, dripping onto the bow that she tightly gripped. The blood was red because she was human. However, in the instant it came into contact with the night wind, the blood turned gold. The blood seemed to be flowing gold, incomparably dignified, incomparably pure. It seemed to contain an endless amount of energy and heat. Just like that, the Wudong bow began to burn. The ice and icicles were instantly purified into smoke. It's been 4,000 characters for the past 2 days, because it's much more beautiful and appropriate for the plot to end here than 3,000. Yes, then the problem is, what do I do without a draft? Tomorrow I have to fly to Shenzhen. I'll leave at around 6 in the morning, and hopefully arrive at the hotel around 6 in the evening. China is just this big, and us Northeasterners are just this willful. I'll go write something first, and then adjust it according to the updates of the next few days. Chapter 277. The peacock's name was Nank, also known as the surpassing bird. When describing innate bloodlines, the latter was usually used. Flowing through Nank's body was the true blood of the surpassing bird. This kind of blood was so cold that it penetrated to the bone, turning into frost upon contact with the wind. Compared to the techniques of the Snow Mountain sect in the northwest, it was naturally many times stronger. Besides the blood of the black frost dragon, It was difficult to find such an extremely cold substance in the world. And the even more terrifying aspect of the surpassing bird's blood was that this kind of blood was extremely poisonous. Even the strongest monster could not resist it. The mottled blood flowed from Nank's wrist to the hilt of the sword, and then died the Wudong longbow. If it were a normal person, they would have died long ago, but Su Yorong was not. She was not frozen into an ice sculpture by Nank's blood, nor was she infected by the poison in her blood. This was because she was the reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix. Flowing through her body was the true blood of the heavenly phoenix. Her blood possessed infinite light and heat, able to burn everything. The battle on the peak of Sunset Valley had reached its final stage. Su Yorong and Nank finally began the contest of innate bloodlines. In the previous battles, they had already proven that whether it was in terms of cultivation, the strength of their willpower, spiritual sense, or sword techniques and archery, their levels were almost completely the same. Now, it was time to see whose blood could burn this world or freeze this world. In the land of demons, in the world of humans, and in White Emperor City by the Red River, in the countless legends, the phoenix was the king of birds. Logically speaking, Su Yorong would definitely obtain the final victory in this contest of innate bloodlines. However, it could not be forgotten that in those countless legends, there was always a peacock that proudly and coldly looked at the world of birds. That peacock had never obeyed the will of the phoenix. If the phoenix really could easily defeat the peacock, how could the peacock dare to disobey? How could it still possess its own cold pride and freedom? This illustrated a very obvious fact. The greatest difference between the peacock and the phoenix was the difference in temperament and worldview, which brought about different choices. However, the strength of their bloodlines was actually very similar. Su Yorong and Nank's blood continued to flow, dyeing the hilt and blade of the sword, as well as the body of the bow. Afterwards, it landed on the surface of the cliff between the two. Those hard rocks also began to violently burn. The entire summit of Sunset Valley began to burn. Regardless of whether it was the golden sacred fire of light or the gloomy and cold ice fire, they were all true flames. It was as if they could scorch even the soul. Two incomparably powerful auras continued to rise as the two noble and proud bloodlines clashed. The void realm that the zither-playing old man had set up could no longer endure. With countless crackling sounds, it turned into countless pieces of transparent glass, and then disappeared into the night sky. A wave of light spread out in all directions from Su Yorong and Nank's bodies. In an instant, they were several hundred miles away. In the darkness of the night, the Sunset Valley mountain ridge was illuminated as if it was daytime. The vast grassland in front of the peak suddenly brightened, especially on the outskirts. The wild grass also seemed to truly begin to burn. The fine, sinister, and terrifying sounds in the depths of the grassland suddenly disappeared. Countless powerful demonic beasts sensed the two incomparably noble and powerful chis contained within the wave of light that came from the peak. They did not dare to act rashly. "It really is amazing," Lu Wan'er said in shock as she gazed in the direction of Sunset Valley. This demon general couple was on the outskirts of the grassland to prevent Zhixio and Qi Jian from escaping. After eating dinner, they were currently washing the dishes. They did not expect that such a terrifying battle was currently taking place on the distant peak. Ting Xiaoming placed the bowl in the basket and asked, "Should we go over and help?" With the strength of their spiritual senses, they could clearly feel the intensity of the battle on the peak of Sunset Valley. The golden flame that came from the true blood of the heavenly phoenix was just too bright. "There's no time." Lu Wan'er shook her head. "Also, Her Highness will not like our unnecessary actions. Since the military advisor said that Su Yorong is dead, then she is definitely dead." The void realm that separated the peak of Sunset Valley and the lonely mountain path from the world of the Garden of Zhou was broken. The black dragon that was flying high in the night sky finally saw the scene below for the first time. Only now did she know that Su Yorong had already left long ago. That fateful battle had already begun. At this moment, many people in the Garden of Zhou had already noticed the battle on the peak of Sunset Valley. Although they could not see the details clearly and did not know who was fighting who, the violent flames on the peak and the terrifying and powerful chi faintly emitted from the flames were enough to move and shock them. The black dragon did not. She looked down at the two girls on the peak. The expression in her vertical pupils was very cold and indifferent, and even faintly contained some disdain. If she was not a spiritual soul and had come with her real body, let alone such an intense and lively battle between the two girls on the peak, just a casual breath of her dragon's breath would probably extinguish the flames. In this tiny world, two little birds play with fire. Ants boast of a great country. How easy is it for an ant to shake a tree? She thought of these words with slight mockery, but in the next moment, she suddenly realized that the chi emitted from the blood and flames burning on the peak of Sunset Valley actually made her somewhat vigilant. As it turned out, those two girls were not ordinary little birds. If their bloodlines were completely awakened, they would actually be on the same level as her. On the peak of Sunset Valley, two noble but completely different streams of blood mixed together. Two bright and gloomy flames also mixed together. This was the so-called blending of blood and fire. Passing through the layers of flames and the surface of the sword and bow, Su Yorong's and Nank's gazes met, and their spiritual worlds faintly connected. In just an instant, Su Yorong saw many scenes. They were scenes of Xuelao City, scenes of the Demon Palace, and scenes of the growth of that girl, who looked like a pigweed farmer. On the contrary, Nank saw very few scenes. She only saw the small stone bridge outside the Divine General of the East's estate, the catkins under the bridge, and the campus of the 13 divisions of radiant green. Nank did not conceal anything. She was cold and proud, not afraid of anyone, not even an opponent like Su Yorong, seeing her true heart. And for some reason, Su Yorong, who should have been even more radiant, had, in these past few years of cultivation, intentionally or unintentionally, covered her spiritual world with many veils. The phoenix really is the most hypocritical of creatures. If you want to become the ruler of the decaying throne, do you have to live so miserly like you? Then you might as well just die. Nank looked into her eyes and coldly said in the spiritual world that was connected. Su Yorong did not respond. She calmly asked, "Do you want to die with me?" Nank indifferently said, "I'm not afraid of death, but you are. So if we die together, the first to die will definitely be you." Su Yorong slightly raised her brows. She did not like this method of battle, and she also did not like the way Nank spoke. She believed that life and death were objects worthy of reverence, and should not be mentioned so lightly. Nank stared at her and said, "You humans always believe in that nonsense. The stronger the ability, the heavier the responsibility. Since it's like this, you don't dare to die, because you still have many responsibilities on your shoulders." Su Yorong calmly asked, "Then what about you? As a demon princess, don't you need to bear responsibilities?" Nank indifferently said, "I have several dozen brothers and sisters. The responsibilities I need to bear are extremely few, other than my own desires and my teacher's expectations." After a moment of silence, Su Yorong said, "Does your father know of this matter? If you die in the Garden of Zhou today, will something happen between your teacher and your father?" It was a very simple conversation. It talked about life and death and responsibility, but it did not argue any reason. It just wanted to let the other party know that she did not fear death, and that the other party definitely had a reason to fear death. This conversation took place in the connected spiritual world, and the attack was also the spiritual world. It was very obvious that the words that Su Yorong had said after some thought did not achieve the desired effect. Nank's expression was still indifferent, as if she did not care at all about her own life or the future of the demons. The divine race needs powerful descendants and the glory of victory. As long as I can kill you, I will prove that the bloodline of the divine race will always be the noblest. How can father be sad or disappointed? He will only be happy to compose a few long poems and carve them on my gravestone." After saying this, Nank took a step forward. Her indifferent expression was incomparably firm, and the blood that flowed from her hands that gripped the hilt of her sword suddenly sped up. As she took this step, a crack appeared on the cliff several hundred zhang away, and a rock several zhang in circumference collapsed into the abyss. The Southern Cross swords became even brighter. One in front of her was like a real river of stars, while the other was behind her. It was like a peacock spreading its tail, blocking the rain of arrows that came from all directions. The cold and mottled blood transformed into countless flames, fiercely burning on the cliff. Her expression was still indifferent, as if she could not feel any pain, nor was she afraid of death. She looked into Su Yorong's eyes and finally said in the spiritual world, "You really are very strong. If I want to kill you, I obviously have to bleed a bit more." Su Yorong's expression was still serene, without a trace of exhaustion. However, she had not slept or rested for 2 consecutive days, rushing through the mountains and fields, using the sacred light to save people. In reality, she was already very tired. How could she defeat the already crazy Nank? She could only exchange blood for blood. With a thought, blood flowed out of her hand that gripped the longbow like a spring. The pure and holy golden flames burned fiercely, causing the abruptly cold cliff to warm up once more. That pure and powerful chi was endlessly released from her body. 2 powerful chis clashed, rushing from the peak of Sunset Valley towards the night sky. Only a light crack could be heard from some distant place. In the depths of the night sky, a crack suddenly appeared on a seemingly transparent curved surface, and then a meteor fell. This place was the Garden of Zhou, so that meteor was probably not a real meteor, but it was also not a Wu arrow. The meteor landed somewhere on the outskirts of Sunset Valley. With a loud bang, the entire mountain ridge began to shake. A cliff on the side of Sunset Valley had completely collapsed. Su Yorong and Nank looked at each other, but did not pay any attention. Their blood constantly flowed, and their chi constantly rose. More and more crackling sounds rang out in the night sky, and more meteors appeared, falling towards Sunset Valley. This chapter was written last night, and will be updated regularly. Today, I spent the entire day on the plane and at the rehearsal site, so I definitely had no time to write. Everyone is very interested in the scene of Yorong shooting arrows, and has asked a few questions. They really scratched my itch, so I will post a picture on my official WeChat account. Yes, sit down. In addition, the name of the chapter has that meaning. It's been a long time since I've played mahjong. Actually, I really like it, but the cervical vertebra, everyone knows it's an occupational disease. Finally, touch it. Chapter 278. The spatial barrier of the Garden of Zhou began to show signs of collapse. This was the inevitable effect of this battle. Su Yorong and Nank's bloodlines were too powerful. Now that they were burning their lives to the limit, the chi they released had long surpassed the peak of ethereal opening, reaching the limit of the Garden of Zhou's laws. Of course, the Garden of Zhou would not be destroyed, because the laws responsible for maintaining the operation of this world would directly destroy all threats, which were the existences of Su Yorong and Nank. The weapons used in the world of the Garden of Zhou were the shattered fragments of the spatial barrier. The fragments of the spatial barrier left the night sky, transformed into meteors, and exploded towards the peak of Sunset Valley. If Su Yorong and Nank did not stop fighting and continued to increase their chi, then they would definitely die. They would be turned into powder by the countless meteors along with Sunset Valley. They would die. Nank was very clear on this point. Previously, when she had thrust the Southern Cross sword at Su Yorong, it had already caused the space in the Garden of Zhou to begin to distort. This allowed her to finally confirm the limit of what the world of the Garden of Zhou could contain. What she wanted to do was raise her strength to the limit, force Su Yorong to the limit as well, and then surpass the limit of what the Garden of Zhou could contain. This was her strategy. This represented her absolute will to fight. Why had her teacher, that flawless demon military advisor Black Robe, given the heavy responsibility of killing Su Yorong to her. It was because Black Robe was very clear that she was willing to die together with Su Yorong. Her fate had been determined by Su Yorong, so she invited her to walk to the end of her fate with joy, because this represented that she could also determine her fate. So tonight, Su Yorong would definitely die in the Garden of Zhou. Although the human girl definitely did not want to accept it, there was no other way. If she continued to burn the true blood of the heavenly phoenix, the world of the Garden of Zhou would send down countless meteors, bringing death. If she stopped, she would be killed by Nank even faster. This was a predestined battle, a battle that could not be avoided. The conclusion of the battle had already been decided, and it was so sorrowful that it caused one's heart to be at a loss. It seemed like no one could change all of this, but at the peak of Sunset Valley, there had always been a spectator. The zither-playing old man was silent. After watching the battle for so long, he finally could not endure it any longer. He was extremely certain that Princess Nank's strategy had definitely obtained Lord Blackrobe's approval, but at the same time, he was even more certain that the Demon Lord knew nothing of this matter. He could not just watch as Princess Nank died in front of him, because he did not want to endure the Demon Lord's wrath after the matter was over, and he did not want his tribe, which had struggled to survive in Xuelao City, to be struck into the abyss by the Demon Lord's wrath, forever sinking into oblivion. So his fingers fell on the strings and very seriously plucked out a note. Hearing the sound of the zither, a hint of anger flashed through Nank's indifferent eyes. After a while, she gradually recovered her usual indifference. The battle between her and Su Yorong did not allow others to interfere. But at this moment, all of her spirit and will were with Su Yorong, so she had no way of stopping the zither-playing old man from helping her. If he couldn't change it, he could only accept it. What calmed her was that there was one thing that could not be changed tonight, and that was that Su Yorong would definitely die. The sound of the zither gurgled. It was very gentle, but it also contained killing intent. As the sound of the zither entered her ears, Su Yorong's face paled even more. Countless perilous waves rose in her sea of consciousness, and she almost lost her grip on the solitary tree longbow, allowing Nank's sword to strike her body. The mental energy attack of that elder from the Candle Shadow Shaman tribe was extremely powerful and terrifying. She had used her mind to resist the even more terrifying Nank, but she had been heavily injured in a single blow. A trickle of blood slowly trickled down from the corner of her lip. Unlike the blood that flowed from her fingers that gripped the longbow, this blood did not come from her will. It was not the result of her burning her life, but the result of her injury. Her eyes were still calm, her expression still focused. She calmly gazed at Nank, not even glancing at the zither-playing old man. Her left hand flew through the night wind and fell into the darkness. It was not a mystical Taoist technique that could invisibly injure an enemy through the air. She only slapped her hand into the darkness. There was nothing in the darkness, so what was she slapping? In the next moment, a black square plate suddenly appeared in the darkness. The black square plate quietly floated in the air by her side, as if it had always been there, but no one had noticed it. This was Su Yorong's fated star plate. Her left hand fell on the center of the fated star plate. She did not move her fingers. At this moment, she did not have the time to calculate what her fate was. The only thing she could do, was to attempt to control her own fate. She poured the vigorous true essence that she had silently accumulated for a very long time, prepared to find an opportunity to deal a fatal blow to Nank. Through this slap, she poured it all into the fated star plate. A muffled sound. This sound was very similar to a gong, but it was even more like a broken gong. The sound was not pleasant to listen to, and was rather muffled. But it was still loud. This was the sound produced by the fated star plate. This was the powerful sound produced by fate. A fierce wind blew on the peak, and the fated star plate flashed with light. Those lines of fate that no one else could understand other than her quickly began to revolve, turning into countless dazzling threads of light. The gurgling sound of the zither was directly interrupted by the sound of the broken gong. Several strings on the zither snapped. The zither-playing old man's face was pale. As if he had been struck by a heavy blow, he continuously vomited blood. To throw fate into disorder, to heavily injure a powerful enemy, Su Yorong's attack seemed to be played down, but in reality, it was powerful to an unimaginable degree. But for this, she had also paid an enormous price. Nank's childish voice rose again, and the Southern Cross sword drew closer. Su Yorong's hand that held the solitary Tong longbow began to violently tremble. Her eyes were still calm, but they were no longer as bright as before. They seemed rather dim. The most shocking thing was that the blood that flowed from the corner of her lips increased in quantity. The zither-playing old man activated his extremely vigorous spiritual sense, forcefully suppressing the heavy injury in his sea of consciousness. He instantly calmed the berserk true essence in his meridians, disregarding his injuries. With a long howl, he struck again. He floated away from the zither, and his two hands landed directly on top of Su Yorong's head. In the darkness, his 10 fingers glowed with a faint white light, as if they did not have any flesh, and only white bones remained. After Su Yorong's left hand struck the fated star plate and produced that powerful sound, she took the opportunity to grab a corner of the fated star plate. She did not know what was so strange about this shaman elder's hands, but presumably, they were also poisonous. She did not even think. With a flip of her wrist, she held the fated star plate and smashed it towards her opponent. This smash seemed simple, like a fight between children, but in reality, it was not simple at all. This was the final move of the Heavenly Academy's Sword of Hithering Light. The Heavenly Academy's Sword of Hithering Light was famed for its speed and sharpness, and this final move was unimaginably fast. It was only because it was fast that it seemed extremely simple. Su Yorong's Sword of Hithering Light was better than any student of the Heavenly Academy. Her strike was faster than the final move of the Sword of Hithering Light by any student of the Heavenly Academy. It was so fast that even the zither-playing old man could not avoid it. A muffled sound of impact rang out. The zither-playing old man could not avoid it, and used his two hands to directly collide with the fated star plate in her hands. In an instant, his fingers broke and his bones cracked. He retreated more than 30 meters, and vomited blood without stopping. Su Yorong was also shaken by this collision, and her eyes became even dimmer. Nank's eyes were still wooden and indifferent, but they were unprecedentedly bright. The zither-playing old man had suffered a crushing defeat in one move, but it had given her the best opportunity of the night. A clear and childish whistle once again resounded through the cliff. Nank's figure suddenly became incorporeal, and the sword screen vanished. She paid no attention to the dozen or so Wu arrows. Her two hands came together, fusing the Southern Cross sword into one, and pierced towards Su Yorong. Swoosh, 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 the Wu arrows pierced through the night sky. Swoosh, 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 the dozen or so arrows pierced deep into her body. Nank's expression did not change, as if she could not feel the pain at all. Two extremely bright sword glows, like two rivers of stars, chopped towards Su Yorong's face. There was a grating sound, the sound of the tong bough breaking through the rocks of the cliff. In the end, the tong bough was unable to resist the might of the Southern Cross sword, and left the ground. The longbow that left the ground was like a rootless wudong tree, and instantly began to wilt. The bright sword glows broke through the bough, chopping at the left side of Su Yorong's chest, causing a spurt of blood. Even at this critical juncture, Su Yorong's eyes were still calm. With a flick of her wrist, she used the longbow to block Nank's sword, and then swiftly retreated backwards. The white ceremonial robe unfurled in the night wind. It was stained with blood like an injured white crane, but still elegant and otherworldly. How could Nank give her the chance to leave? She swept forward like a shadow. The Tong Bao and the Southern Cross sword clashed, creating countless turbulent currents in the night sky. Nank's entire body was covered in blood, but her eyes were even brighter. Her hands left the hilt of her sword, and like lightning, she thrust forward. Her fingertips glowed with a faint green light. The peacock had a tail feather, the most venomous, the sharpest, and the fastest in the world. This was the peacock plume, the true peacock plume. Nank's 10 fingers stabbed into Su Yorong's shoulders, deep into her bones. Blood splattered everywhere, and the golden light seemed to be covered in many black spots. Pain, so pain, it really was very painful. Su Yorong had never felt such pain before. So she was very angry, unprecedentedly angry. With a tearing sound, the white ceremonial robe shattered into countless pieces. Countless golden lights, following the direction of her fingers, struck Nank's body. The muffled sounds of collisions resounded. Countless finger holes appeared on Nank's body, and blood endlessly gushed out from them. The peacock had feathers. The phoenix had feathers. This was Su Yorong's myriad feathers. All of her cultivation had been used. All of her divine artifacts and demonic weapons had been used. All of her life-saving abilities had been used. All of her true essence had been used. All of her blood had almost been drained. This battle was so bitter, so desperate. The peak of Sunset Valley was quiet. The dust on the cliff gradually settled, but the blood that had spilled out was still burning. The blazing heat and cold constantly mixed and disappeared, and it was extremely bright. Su Yorong stood at the edge of the cliff, her face slightly pale, her clothes speckled with blood. Nank looked even more miserable. Her entire body was covered in wounds, and blood endlessly flowed out. But she had won. A clear whistle continuously resounded from the peak of Sunset Valley. Her voice was so young and tender, yet so callous. This clear whistle was cold, proud, tyrannical. In the end, it gave off a feeling of madness. Although it was somewhat regretful, victory was the most important matter. Although she had the assistance of experts, death was the fairest judge of victory and defeat. She and Su Yorong were already at the end of their rope, but in the next moment Su Yorong would die. Tonight, she had finally defeated her destined opponent. This signified that she had defeated her fate. The whistle of the surpassing bird gradually became softer, and then stopped. Nank returned to her previous indifferent appearance and woodenly said, "My blood is in your body, and behind you is a bottomless abyss, so you are dead." Su Yorong stood at the edge of the cliff, the night wind gently blowing the hair on her face. She lowered her head, thinking about something. Was she thinking about what kind of posture she should use to welcome death? "Please bestow this glory upon me," Nank said seriously as she looked at her. Su Yorong raised her head to look at her, and a hint of relief and teasing appeared in her eyes. She was like an old woman who had seen through the world and could calmly welcome death, and also like a naughty little girl. "Why should I make you happy?" She smiled as she said these words, then turned around and walked into the darkness of the cliff. As she gazed at the empty cliff, a hint of confusion appeared in Nank's eyes. She blankly said, "Are you an idiot? Do you really think you're a phoenix?" Su Yorong was the reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix, but not a true phoenix. She did not have wings, nor had she cultivated to the saint realm, so she naturally could not fly freely. She walked into the night of the cliff, so she naturally fell into the abyss of death. It was quiet, whether it was on the cliff or elsewhere. Su Yorong, the reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix, even in the last 10-odd years of blooming wildflowers, she was unquestionably the most beautiful flower. She was regarded as the future leader of the humans, and the greatest threat of the demons. Was she really going to quietly die in the garden of Zhou like this? Nank walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down into the pitch-black abyss. She silently thought, "Even if you die, you are not willing to die by my hand. Is this your final pride, or is this returning to your true self?" The black dragon was silent in the clouds. She did not like humans, and Chen Chongqing was probably the only exception, especially after she had sensed the past events recounted by her father's heroic spirit in the Garden of Zhou. She was filled with hostility towards the human experts. Naturally, this included Su Yorong, the human girl who could possibly become the strongest. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have any sympathy or sadness towards Su Yorong's death. Moreover, she clearly remembered that Chen Chongqing had said many times that he didn't like this fiancé of his. But why did she still feel a little confused and even a little uneasy? If Chen Chongqing knew that she personally witnessed the scene of Su Yorong's death and didn't do anything, would he blame her? Su Yorong fell into the abyss of death, her eyes tightly closed. The sound of the wind by her ears was so distant. Blood once again flowed from the corner of her lips, and upon meeting the night wind, it began to burn. It became a string of bright flame that floated behind her, but it could only illuminate a very small area around her, not enough to illuminate the path ahead. Wasn't the ground getting closer and closer? Death was also getting closer and closer, but why was this mountain in the Garden of Zhou so high? Just how long would she have to fall before she could obtain the final peace? No, death was the end, not peace. That was not the other shore of the sea of stars that she had pursued while cultivating. She had leapt from the edge of the cliff not to seek refuge in death, but to not die at the hands of that pigweed harvesting girl. But how could she not die? She closed her eyes and thought about this question, but where could she find an answer? She fell faster and faster, and the wind grew stronger and stronger. As a result, the more she thought, the colder she felt, frustrated and helpless. Suddenly, she thought of something the Divine Empress had said to her many years ago when she left the capital. "Little Phoenix, it's fine to be afraid of pain, but don't be afraid of death, especially you." Then, her eyes opened. There's a draft. It's just this confident. It's written so calmly and powerfully. Chapter 279. The shadow enveloped both inside and outside the Garden of Zhou. In the late night of the snowy plains, there were only countless snowflakes in the night sky. No stars could be seen, but one could clearly see the shadow that extended from Xuelao City. That shadow was even darker than the night, even colder than death. It represented the will of the Demon Lord. No matter how dazzling that sword glow pierced through it could not break through it in a short amount of time. However, that sword glow was already powerful enough, even possessing the ability to resist that shadow. The sword glow could not cut through the shadow, but it could easily cut through many other things. For example, the terrifying arm of the third demon general or the throat of the seventh demon general. The seventh demon general clutched his throat, and like a mountain, he slowly collapsed. The sword glow returned once more, entering the sheath and withdrawing its chi. However, whether it was the seventh demon general on the verge of death or the other demon experts, none of them had any change in emotion because of this scene. This certain death situation was brimming with a daunting indifference. Suli lowered his head, thinking about something. His right hand gripped the hilt of his sword, and his black hair was already draped over his shoulders. In the cold night wind, it gently danced like a demon or a god. Black Robe's gaze pierced through the deep sea and fell on his body. He indifferently said, "Your daughter is about to die, and you are about to die as well. What sort of feeling is this?" These words were undoubtedly a psychological attack, and could even be described as a very crude and simple psychological attack. However, simplicity did not mean that it was powerless. Black Robe wanted to use these words to break his mental state. Suli raised his head and calmly said to Black Robe, "Since you want to kill me, why must you have these guys take turns fighting me? If you constantly add firewood to the fire, you will only be incessantly burned to ashes. As long as you add enough firewood, there will always be a moment when the fire will be extinguished." Black Robe indifferently said, "This kind of battle might pay an even greater price, but it can guarantee that you will definitely die." Suli was silent, because he knew that Black Robe was right. The shadow from Xuelao City had cut off his connection with the human world, and there were still many true experts of the demon race that had yet to act, such as the legendary demon commander, or Black Robe, who had always sat quietly. In order to kill the junior martial uncle of Mountley, the demons had made very meticulous arrangements. This arrangement involved the Garden of Zhou and the distant southern continent. No matter what countermeasures the experts of White Emperor City or the human world had, it was already too late. The Demon Lord's pressure was in preparation, and the Demon Council of Elders in Shualao City was also waiting. This sort of killing technique was a grinding method. Black Robe wanted to use a sufficient number of demon experts to grind away at Su Li's sword intent and chi, so that he could kill his opponent in such a simple and even somewhat impatient manner. This was the only way to avoid any accident. You are the most dazzling star in the human world after the war. You have brought too many accidents to this continent, and you know that I hate accidents the most. Black Robe looked at him and said. Su Li remained silent for a very long time, then said, "No, I won't die." Black Robe's voice rose slightly, appearing somewhat interested as he asked, "Oh? Why?" Su Li looked at him calmly and said, "There's no reason, nor is there any reason. I just believe that I will not die. Similarly, I believe that the girl and those children that represent the future of humanity will also not die." Black Robe said, "I admire you for having such unreasonable confidence even before your death." Su Li laughed again. His eyes reflected the snowy sky, as if they were about to ignite. "You can be afraid of pain, but you cannot be afraid of death, especially you. Why? Could it be that death is not as frightening and sinister as pain? And why did you say the word especially? Why can't I be afraid of death?" In the process of falling into the abyss of death, Su Yorong thought about these words and the many things that had arisen from them. Suddenly, she understood a few principles, so she opened her eyes. Why was it that she could not be afraid of death? Because she was a phoenix. Her fate was predetermined. It was to constantly temper her soul between death and pain, until a certain day, when she could calmly welcome death. Only then could she truly welcome a new life. Was this what it meant to face death and live? "Empress, was this what you wanted to tell me?" In just an instant, Su Yorong felt that the endless abyss before her had suddenly become bright. At this moment, her body was heavily injured, her true essence exhausted, and the poison corroding her body and mind. However, the principles she had comprehended made her unprecedentedly calm. As she constantly fell, the wind between the cliffs brushed away the blood at the corner of her lips like a streak of fire. Countless pearl-like specks of light appeared in her eyes. As she descended into the abyss, she calmly awaited the arrival of death. Calmness was a fearless attitude, but it was not ignorance. She sensed the sinister coldness of death, experienced the true meaning of death, and then began to fear once more. This fear did not mean that she had left her fearless state of mind. It was still a kind of perception, a clear and distinct perception that had been deeply branded into her mind. Only the great fear brought by death could arouse an unimaginable energy from the very core of her mind, the energy hidden in her blood. That boundless energy began to burn, beginning to make her enter a strange state where clarity and absent-mindedness intersected. As death gradually approached, a soul deep within her body awoke. It was the soul of the phoenix, and also her own soul. It was a part of herself that she had never directly looked at or even discovered. She opened her eyes and looked into the pitch-black abyss and the invisible yet cold night wind. She truly understood she's fate. Fate had made her leave Holy Maiden Peak and come to the Garden of Zhou. But fate had not made her meet Nank, but had made her meet herself. She had met her other self, her truest self. This journey had not been made in vain. As she fell towards death, she was filled with endless sorrow. In the deathly silent abyss, in the silent cliff, on the lofty sunset valley, and in the vast world of the Garden of Zhou, a clear cry suddenly resounded. The sound was not mature and carried a little immaturity, but it was incomparably clear and melodious. Compared to this clear cry, Nank's clear cry from before suddenly seemed lacking in grandeur. This clear cry was the cry of a young phoenix. The aura of a king was completely revealed in this phoenix cry. Nank quietly stood at the edge of the cliff. She did not know if she was holding a memorial for the death of her fated opponent, or if she was sighing over the fact that her life would return to loneliness from now on. After a while, she turned around and walked towards the stone plateau between the cliff. The person had already passed away. Although there was some disappointment and emptiness that she had expected, there was even more satisfaction. From tonight onwards, there would no longer be anyone that could fly in the same sky as her. This was something to be happy about. Then, the cry of the phoenix resounded through the cliff. She stopped and turned to look at the night sky beyond the cliff. Her face revealed an expression of disbelief. A pair of flame wings appeared in the darkness, illuminating the cliffs and carrying Su Yorong into the distance. I will do my best to persevere in updating. Everyone, please vote for me. Thank you everyone. Chapter 280. A pair of wings of fire unfurled in the night sky and flew into the distance. Like a moving star, it illuminated the surroundings and was exceptionally eye-catching. Nank stood at the edge of the cliff and silently watched this scene. Her small face was abnormally pale. The injuries left on her body by the myriad feather had already been forcefully suppressed by her, but she could not suppress the anger and unwillingness in her heart no matter what. A clear and beautiful yet abnormally ruthless bird cry burst forth from her lips. It traveled into the distance, as if it was summoning something. The zither-playing old man's expression suddenly changed. He extended his hand to stop her, but because of his injuries, he could not stand up. He could only watch as Nank jumped off the cliff in the next moment. The clear cry of the young wind resounded through the garden of Zhou. In the 3 gardens at the edge of the garden of Zhou, there were many human cultivators gathered there. Previously, the bloody battle at the peak of Sunset Valley had produced a strange phenomenon, attracting the gazes of many people. Naturally, they did not miss the cry of the phoenix. In the even more secluded mountains, there were still some human experts at the upper level of ethereal opening who were secretly exploring and searching for treasures. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong had used 2 days and 2 nights to no avail. The warning fireworks from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green had also not been able to make these people reveal their track. Among them, there was a 300-year-old wandering cultivator from the south. At this moment, he was beside an ancient scholar tree. According to an account from a predecessor, he was trying to find an extremely powerful magical artifact left behind by the shaman tribe of the south in the garden of Zhou. Suddenly, he heard the cry of the phoenix and turned his head in shock. His aged face was illuminated by the pair of wings of fire in the night sky. His somewhat turbid eyes revealed an expression of shock, which then transformed into endless greed. Zhixiu carried Qi Jian on his back as he walked through the plains. His eyes could no longer see, but his hearing was still sharp. When the cry of the phoenix rang out, he stopped. Qi Jian opened his eyes with difficulty and gazed at the night sky in the west. He said somewhat perplexedly, "Is it Senior Su? She also entered the garden of Zhou? It should be her." Zhixiu tilted his ear to listen to the echo of the phoenix cry in the sky above the plains and confirmed. The events that had occurred after the opening of the Garden of Zhou this year were all part of the demon race's scheme. Su Yorong's name was definitely on the list of the demon race's must-kill target. Qin Yan weakly said, "I don't know who the demon race will send to deal with her, but it should be fine." Su Yurong and Qiushan Jun were not ordinary young geniuses. Their innate bloodlines had an overwhelming advantage. In the Garden of Zhou, a miniature world with an upper limit, logically speaking, the demons should not have been able to do anything to Su Yurong. However, when he thought about the assassination by the lake and the sudden betrayal of his third senior brother, Qi Jian was still very worried. Zhixiu thought of those 2 beauties by the lake with completely different temperaments, yet they seemed to be twins. those two beauties' fingertips suffused with a faint green light, or the poison that was restlessly stirring in the depths of his eyes. He knew that those two women were definitely Nank's two wings. He said, "Nank has come. The one fighting Su Yu-rong is definitely her. I just don't know who will win." In the entire continent, whether it was the human race or the demon race, the only person in the Nether Passage realm who could threaten Su Yu-rong was Nank. Hearing Nank's name, Qi Jian's face paled even more. After a moment of silence, he said, "Where do we go next?" It was already night, but the sun in the plains of the unsetting sun had not set. If one were to say that the mystical and indistinct ball of light floating on the horizon was the sun, that powerful demon general couple stood guard outside the plains. They could not go out and could only walk through the plains. Then, where should they go? It was said that the plains of the unsetting sun hid an extremely terrifying danger. As long as one entered, they would not be able to leave. Then, where was the danger? Zhishio said, "Take out the flowing water bottle." Qi Jian did as he was told and took out the flowing water bottle. He did not dare to believe his eyes and said, "We've already been in here for 6 hours?" That red, warm, and indistinct sun hung at the edge of the plains, the dividing line between the sky and the earth. It incessantly turned, but the light did not change at all. It was indeed easy to have problems with one's sense of time, but this was not the only reason why Qi Jian was so shocked. Zhishio had suffered very heavy injuries, but his speed had never once decreased. In 6 hours, he could travel at least 100 li. However, they had clearly seen the fire at the peak of Sunset Valley, and the cry of the phoenix seemed to be right next to their ears. When they turned their heads to look, the mountain was still there. They had walked through the plains for 6 hours, but it seemed like they had just entered. Hearing Qi Jian's description, Zhishio lowered his head in silence for a very long time. This legendary grassland finally began to reveal its strange and sinister side to these two youths. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in the deep grass in front of them, as if some wild beast was currently making its way through it. In the next moment, those sounds completely disappeared, but this did not mean that the danger had left. Qi Jian was somewhat uneasy. He felt that there were many invisible things in the grass watching him. Zhishio lowered his head and turned his face to the side. As he listened to the sounds coming from the grass in front of him, his face became more and more solemn and more unsightly. He had lived on the snowy plains since he was a child and hunted monsters for a living. Naturally, he could clearly hear the sounds of monsters walking, flying low, grinding their sharp teeth, and even the dripping of saliva. Most frightening of all was that in just a few short moments, he had heard the sounds of at least 7 different kinds of monsters. Moreover, these monsters were all powerful monsters that were rarely seen on the snowy plains. On the snowy plains, he was the hunter, but in the plains of the Garden of Zhou, those monsters seemed to treat him and Qi Jian as prey. This caused him to feel an intense discomfort and anger. Moreover, he was very clear that if he continued to stay like this, it would be a very dangerous matter. He raised his head and gazed into the depths of the plains. His eyes could not see, and his pupils could not focus. They seemed very apathetic, and that bewitching green had already occupied his entire pupils, making them seem abnormally terrifying. Qi Jian leaned on his shoulder and looked at his profile. He subconsciously felt a little cold and fearful, and his body slightly trembled. "Don't be afraid," Zhishio expressionlessly said. As soon as he finished speaking, a series of grinding sounds arose from his body. It was the sound of his bones and muscles grinding against each other, and even reassembling. Countless thick and hard wolf bristles grew from his cheeks, and his knees once again strangely bent backwards. His teeth gradually elongated, transforming into incomparably sharp fangs that poked out of his lips, demi-human transformation. As Zhishio's body changed, his qi also suddenly changed. A cold-blooded and callous aura began to pervade the grass in front of him. In the quiet depths of the grass, there was suddenly another rustling sound. Soon after, there was the sound of footsteps, but there was also a haughty and provocative growl. The monsters of the plains were extremely sensitive to the wolf youth's transformation, so they reacted at the first moment. After Jishio transformed, his pupils were scarlet red. At this moment, mixed with the poison of the peacock plume, they once again turned into that lemon-like yellow. He clearly could not see anything, but he calmly stared straight ahead, as if he was staring into the eyes of those monsters. A whoa! An extremely callous, extremely powerful, and extremely ruthless wolf howl burst forth from his lips, rapidly spreading through the plains. A chilly wind blew through the grass, causing countless branches to fall. One could faintly make out the silhouettes of many monsters. From this wolf howl, those monsters could hear the strength and determination to put their lives on the line. With another grinding sound, they finally scattered. Qi Jian leaned on Jishio's shoulder. He truly was somewhat afraid of his current appearance, even though Jishio had already told him not to be afraid. Thus, he hugged Jishio even tighter and pressed his face even closer. He said to himself, "This way, I can't see, so I don't need to be afraid." Perhaps because of his actions, or because of the greedy gazes of the monsters as they left, Jishio's body was somewhat stiff, and his voice was also somewhat unnatural. "We must think of a way to leave, or else those truly powerful monsters will hear the sound and come over to patrol." Qi Jian grunted, thinking, "Whatever you say is fine." The wolf youth's wild howl reverberated through the plains of the unsetting sun, but it did not reach outside of the plains. The miniature world of the Garden of Zhou had always had many strange and incomprehensible places. Just like the phoenix cry that resounded through the world at Sunset Valley Peak, it also did not truly reach every corner of the Garden of Zhou, because some places seemed like another world within this world. At the end of the stream, below the waterfall, there was a cold pool. On the other side of the pool was a lake, and the shore of the lake was another world. The people in that world did not hear the phoenix cry. Liang Xiaoxiao and Zhuang Huanyu were no longer in the forest, and no one knew where they had gone. The surface of the lake was calm, but the depths of the lake still seemed to be boiling. Countless fine bubbles shot out from the two wings of light, then quickly disappeared without a trace. Chen Chongqing was wrapped up in the wings of light of those two beautiful yet terrifying women, so of course he could not hear the phoenix cry. Moreover, even if the phoenix cry reached his ears, he would not have any reaction. This was because at this moment, he was about to be turned into a bright yet lifeless pearl by those wings of light, like a mosquito caught in a spider's web. He could die at any moment, and all his thoughts were focused on finding a way out. Where was the way out? If there really was no way out, then he would have to use his sword to cut open a path. The problem was, he no longer had the strength to hold his own dagger, let alone cut open this pair of wings of light. The way out was that faintly discernible yet incomparably real sword intent in the lake? But if he wanted to follow that sword intent and leave, how could he do so? Before he was bound by the wings of light, he had tried to ignite the lake water outside of his ethereal palace, but it was to no avail. It was just like how he struggled and bounced at the very beginning, only seeming somewhat laughable. His throat was gripped by that demon beauty, and his body was restrained by that dignified woman. Those two wings of light brought with them an endless and terrifying pressure, suppressing the last of his true essence and the slightest of movements. He could not move a single finger and could not even blink. He could only feel the slightly cold lake water brushing against his eyeballs. That feeling was truly not good. This pair of women, after fusing together, finally revealed the frightening power and level they possessed. His breathing became weaker and weaker, and his mind became more and more dazed. Looking at the two beautiful faces in the lake water illuminated by the wings of light, he felt very gloomy. He thought to himself, could this be the appearance of the death god? At this moment, even the circulation of his true essence was suppressed by the pressure of the wings of light. The only thing he could still use was his divine sense. Before death truly arrived, Chen Chongqing would never surrender and give up. Of course he would try to use his divine sense to escape, but the problem was, he had not cultivated to the profound level of killing with his thoughts. No matter how calm, stable, and powerful his divine sense was, it could not be used in battle. What could his divine sense be used for? Before he could think clearly about this matter, his divine sense had already fallen upon the dagger. Noiselessly, several chests appeared in the world isolated by the pair of wings of light. Try to finish the next chapter before 8:30. Chapter 281. Those chests were very heavy. Once they appeared, Chen Chongqing and the two girls sank to the bottom of the lake even faster. The two girls were surprised. They didn't know how these chests appeared and what was inside. The chests weren't locked. Under the impact of the lake water, the lids were opened. Under the soft and beautiful light of the wings of light, the contents of the chests also began to emit another kind of soft and beautiful light. It was a holy white light that had unimaginable magic, at least to humans. If it wasn't such a tense moment of life and death, perhaps the two girls would also think so. The contents of the chests were silver. The light it emitted was called silver light. It was more real than starlight, more tempting, and therefore more beautiful. Among the silver were the traveling expenses and living expenses that Chen Chongqing's master and senior gave him before he left Xining village. There was also a part of the gift from Luo Luo for becoming his disciple. There was also Tang 36's generous share. There were also some gifts from the clergy of Li Palace. As for the exact amount, he never counted it. He just thought of a way to exchange it for silver ingots and then carried it with him. Now, at the most dangerous moment of his life, he used all the silver at once. Within the space of the wings of light, countless tails of silver were tossed and turned by the lake water. Like stones, they smashed onto his and the two girls' bodies and faces. But this wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to break the pair of wings of light. He needed more things. Thus, Chen Chongqing's divine sense continued to go deep into the hilt of the dagger. The next thing that appeared was a luminous pearl. This luminous pearl was very round and very large. It was even larger and rounder than the luminous pearls on the edge of the dew platform. It was even larger and rounder than the luminous pearls on the ceiling of the underground cave where the black dragon lived. This luminous pearl was the first gift that Luo Luo gave him. It looked more like a washbasin. Of course, for the two girls who lived in Shuelao City, they would rather use the term holy moon to describe this extraordinarily large luminous pearl. But they couldn't be as shocked and excited as normal girls. One reason was because they were in a battle. The other reason was because the luminous pearl directly smashed onto the demon girl's face. Even in the lake water, the muffled sound was so clear. In the next moment, green blood flowed out of the demon girl's nose. The demon woman was very angry, but also very flustered. She had no idea where this luminous pearl had come from, and it had indeed been smashed quite heavily. But this was still not enough to help Chen Chongqing escape the restraints of this pair of light wings. Thus, Chen Chongqing's divine sense continued to extend into the sword hilt, taking out item after item. What appeared next was half a roasted lamb. The half-roasted lamb that seemed to still be steaming appeared within the wings of light, blasting the dignified woman's body. It was obvious that the woman was a bit of a neat freak. Hugging a whole roasted lamb covered in oil almost drove her crazy. But that's not all. 1 roast chicken, 2 roast chickens, 3 roast chickens. More than a dozen roast chickens appeared in the wings of light like stones in a catapult, smashing at her incessantly. There was also Liaobei County's roasted deer tail, Wanzhou County's roasted fish, Wenshui's spicy 13 plates, the Southern Sea's steamed double-headed fish. Chen Chongqing's divine sense connected. Countless food appeared one after another. The space within the wings of light was instantly filled. These were all the food that the Black Dragon asked him to prepare before leaving the capital, but the Black Dragon was only a spiritual soul attached to the Rui Jade. No matter how much it tried, it couldn't eat so much. Thus, these food were all left, extremely fresh, very spicy, very vigorous, and retained their original taste. Within the wings of light, roasted chicken and duck wings flew together, red soup and persimmon were the same color. It was a mess. Countless food and juices mixed together, extremely disgusting. What's going on? The demon woman squeezed her head out of the Ingo braised jade cabbage, and shouted angrily. Her eyes were very panicked. The last thing Chen Chongqing took out was the thing that he had the most in his life books. No one knew that the 3,000 scrolls of the way in the old temple of Xining village were no longer in the old temple, but by his side. He took out the 3,000 scrolls of the way and used them to beat people. There was a loud bang. Countless books filled up the space formed by the wings of light. The wings of light could no longer close. Accompanied by the two women's shocked and even somewhat absurd screams, the wings of light then dispersed. The books and food turned into countless arrows, shot towards the surrounding of the lake, then gradually slowed down. Unfortunately, although the wings of light were broken, the two women didn't let go of Chen Chongqing. He was still sinking into the depths of the lake. The books and food, the luminous pearl and the silver box, were all in the surrounding lake, sinking with him. The scene was very strange. The luminous pearl, not far from his side, illuminated the pitch-black lake, illuminated the things that were falling with him, allowing him to see very clearly. The books and food, the luminous pearl and the silver box, the various medicinal ingredients, were his life, were his memories, or in other words, were his life. Looking at these things, he easily remembered the days 10 years ago when he was reciting the scriptures with his senior by the stream outside the old temple in Xining village. He remembered the little girl who climbed over the wall of the herb garden to the Tradition Academy. In the process of sinking into the lake, he remembered many things and many people. The rich Tang 36, the poor Xian Yuan Po, Jin Yu Lu who sat in front of the Tradition Academy drinking tea, the Pope, Mei Li Sha, Master, Senior, are you okay? Then he saw a letter and a small toy. This made him remember the white crane. He continued to sink into the depths of the lake. It was getting colder and colder. Death was getting closer and closer. His breath was getting weaker and weaker. Although his eyes were still open, he looked very calm. His eyes were so clean that even in the lake, they still gave people the feeling of a clear lake that could reflect what people were thinking in their hearts. This kind of calmness and cleanliness made the two women feel uneasy like they had never felt before, just like when they saw the indifference between the eyes of the little girl, Nank, on the first day of life. Among the objects that accompanied Chen Chongqing to the bottom of the lake, the brightest was obviously the luminous pearl. They didn't notice that behind the luminous pearl's light, there was a metal ball. The lake water gently swayed, and the metal ball slowly fell into his palm. He subconsciously closed his fingers and held it tightly. That extremely faint and faintly discernible sword intent was still at the deepest part of the lake, as if it was calling out to him, to cut open that path of survival, but his blood was almost completely drained. His breath was about to disappear. Even if he felt it, what could he do? Even if he gripped the metal ball, he couldn't open the yellow paper umbrella. What could he do? Suddenly, the metal ball in his palm began to violently tremble, then began to spin at high speed. Wah! The scales on the surface of the metal ball split open, accompanied by the clear sound of metal grinding and the clashing of springs. It instantly blossomed into an umbrella. A burst of water burst out from the depths of the lake. The yellow paper umbrella once again appeared in Chen Chongqing's hand. The two women only noticed it now, but it was already too late. The yellow paper umbrella began to spin at high speed, creating countless splashes of water. The seemingly not sharp edge of the umbrella left several deep wounds on the bodies of the two women. With a pained groan, the two women were jolted away by a powerful force. The waves at the bottom of the lake surged, as if it was boiling again. The yellow paper umbrella, carrying the finally fainted Chen Chongqing, transformed into a water dragon, smashing apart the lake water, breaking open a path, and rushing at high speed towards a certain place several li away. That faintly discernible sword intent was there. As it turned out, that sword intent, from beginning to end, had not been calling out to Chen Chongqing, but was calling out to the umbrella. Prize guesses, what is the relationship between that sword intent and the yellow paper umbrella? In a moment, I'll post a question on the WeChat public account. Everyone race to answer. The first 3 who answer correctly will receive a prize. Yup, every time there's a guessing contest, it's when I'm happy. Isn't writing a story the happiest thing about it? Chapter 282. The ice-cold lake water struck his face like countless sharp knives. After an unknown amount of time, Chen Chongqing finally awoke. He tried to open his eyes, but the oncoming lake water made it impossible for him to feel pain, so he could only close them again. He did not know what his current situation was. He only knew that he was moving forward at an unimaginable speed through the lake water. Moreover, from the feeling in his hands, he confirmed that the yellow paper umbrella had saved his life. The yellow paper umbrella was an inanimate object, so how could it act on its own? To him, this was a question that was extremely difficult to understand. The sword intent that was faintly transmitted from somewhere in front of him made him vaguely guess at something, but he still could not connect the sword intent with the yellow paper umbrella. The sword intent should have belonged to the legendary sword pool, which had already disappeared from the Garden of Zhou for several hundred years. As for the yellow paper umbrella, it was a new object that the junior martial uncle of Mount Li, Su Li, had requested the Wenshuitangs to create. There was a time difference between the two, so logically there should not have been any connection. After another period of time, he became more clear-headed. With great difficulty, he adjusted his posture and squinted his eyes. Only when he saw the pair of wings of light not far behind him did he know that the danger was not far away. At the same time, the invisible injuries in his body began to clearly transmit pain into his sea of consciousness, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. The yellow paper umbrella in front of him constantly rotated at high speed, just like the propellers that the people of the Great Western Province used to make large ships. It carried him forward at high speed. The dark and ice-cold lake water constantly battered against his body, bringing him even more pain. Just how long would he have to run? Where was the yellow paper umbrella taking him? Suddenly, he realized that the lake water had disappeared, and at the same time, many sounds entered his ears. Those were the sounds of the lake water breaking apart, and the cries of insects in the grass by the lake. That clear and childish yet somewhat violent cry should have come from very far away, but why did it seem like it was right next to his ears? Was the dark curtain in front of him the true bottom of the lake? No, it was the night sky. The reason why it was so dark was because there were no stars in the Garden of Zhou. This was a small lake over 10 li in front of Sunset Valley. Tonight, this small lake had seen the bloody and fiery battle on the mountain peak, heard the cry of the phoenix, was illuminated by the wings of fire, and now heard the cry of the sparrow. It had just tried to calm down, but it was broken once more. The yellow paper umbrella spun, bringing Chen Chongqing out of the lake. The lake water dripped down from the umbrella and his body, sprinkling in all directions, forming a curtain of water. Chen Chongqing awoke and knew that he had finally left the sinister and frightening waters of the lake. He had returned to the world above the lake, but he did not know whether he was in the Garden of Zhou or on the other side of the cold pool. The next moment, he found himself in the night sky. The small lake beneath his feet had turned into a mirror. It was at least 100 feet above the ground. Anyone would be startled and absent-minded to suddenly go from the depths of the lake to the night sky. Right at this moment, the lake water split open once again. The pair of light wings transformed into a stream of light and caught up to him. The wing tips closed and turned into a sharp thorn, heavily striking his chest and abdomen. A muffled sound. Chen Chongqing's blood boiled and he almost spat out blood. He forcefully swallowed it, but it didn't mean he wasn't injured. He, who was already heavily injured, could no longer hold on after suffering another heavy blow. Holding the yellow paper umbrella, he was like a kite with its string cut, dispiritedly flying higher into the night sky. When he flew to the highest point and fell back to the ground, would it be the time of his death? As he thought of these things, he fainted once again. In the last moment before he fainted, he suddenly felt that the night sky had become somewhat brighter. It was not an illusion of death, but the night sky had truly been illuminated. What illuminated the night sky was a pair of wings of fire. They were not the wings of light behind the two women who had chased after him, but a pair of wings of fire. The pair of wings of fire unfurled in the night sky. They were very large and emitted a warm and holy flame. As a result, the girl within the pair of wings of fire seemed rather petite. The wings of fire broke through the night sky. Just as Chen Chongqing was about to fall to his death, they grabbed him and then continued to fly into the distance. The two women who had chased after Chen Chongqing all the way here felt an indescribable and intense fear. They quickly flapped their wings of light and retreated backward. Afterwards, they thought of the cry of the sparrow they had heard in the lake, and the fear in their hearts grew even stronger. Without even thinking, they used a method that seemed to be burning their lives and flew at an unimaginable speed towards the source of the cry. Nank jumped down from the edge of the cliff, moving faster and faster like a rock. The whistling wind blew at her hair, but it could not blow away the indifference between her brows. As for the ground and death that was getting closer and closer, it was meaningless to her. This was because she could see very clearly that her two maids had already arrived at the bottom of the cliff in front of Sunset Valley Peak, and were waiting. Without a sound, the two women caught Nank's petite body. Then, in the blink of an eye, they turned into a ball of light and merged into the wings of light. They were like a cloud that had merged into the blue sky. The pair of bright wings of light that had previously chased after Chen Chongqing suddenly became colored. The edges of the wings of light were painted with a strange green, as if they had turned from a spiritual body to a physical body. The green wings slowly flapped behind Nank's back. She looked indifferently into the distance in the night sky. After confirming the position of the wings of fire that had already become specks of light, she flapped her wings without the slightest hesitation and chased in that direction. The green wings that were several meters long created two gales in front of the cliff. A terrifying whistling sound rang out in the night, and then she disappeared. The innate bloodline of humans or demons seemed similar to the transformation of demi-humans, but in reality, there was a huge difference. The awakening of the innate bloodline was usually divided into 4 stages. The initial awakening was in the bloodline itself, and the second awakening was the awakening of the soul. In simpler terms, after this awakening, the cultivator and her innate bloodline would fuse into one. There would no longer be any distinction between them, and they would truly understand what they were. After 2 consecutive days and 2 nights without sleep or rest, she was finally defeated by the combined forces of Nank and the zither-playing old man. She calmly walked into the abyss of despair. Before the great fear of death, Su Yorong successfully completed the second awakening. Just like that, the phoenix soul in the deepest part of her body awakened. Her bloodline and her body fused and gave birth to each other. With a single thought of her soul, there would be wings of fire that unfurled in the night sky. However, this did not mean that she suddenly possessed the power to incinerate the entire world. At the moment, she was still heavily injured, and Nank's poisonous blood was still wreaking havoc in her body. This caused her vision to become somewhat blurry, so she did not fly back to the top of the cliff to fight to the death with Nank. Instead, she flew into the distance in the night sky. What she needed the most right now was treatment and combing her feathers. However, she did not think that not long after she left Sunset Valley, she would actually encounter another battle in that seemingly calm little lake over 10 kilometers away. With just a glance, she knew that the two women who broke out of the lake, their bodies connected, and had wings of light on their backs, were the infamous Nank's two wings. Then who were they chasing? The next chapter, before 8:30. Chapter 283. No matter who it was, in that instant of time, it was impossible to clearly see their appearance. It was definitely a human cultivator that had entered the garden of Zhou. This reason was enough. In the process of flying away from Sunset Valley, Su Yorong did not hesitate to expend her true essence once again to adjust her direction. When that human cultivator was seriously injured and unconscious, at the crucial moment when he was about to fall from the night sky to his death, she grabbed him and brought him along as she flew into the distance. She had no experience in flying, but she had experience riding a white crane in the clear sky. Flying in the night sky, she did not feel the unease or fear that she had imagined. However, she was still a beginner, so it was inevitable that she would be a little clumsy, especially when she was already heavily injured and very weak. Now that she had to carry a person in her hands, she could not help but sway a little. She looked like she was drunk. In a short amount of time, Nank had caught up to several li behind her. Even at this distance, she seemed to be able to feel her opponent's killing intent. She did not turn her head. She focused and earnestly learned how to fly. The frequency of the flaming wings became slower and slower, but her posture became more and more stable. Her speed became faster and faster, gradually becoming a line of fire in the night sky. The awakening of the Phoenix soul allowed her to understand many principles and obtain many innate abilities. In terms of speed alone, she was unquestionably the number one on the continent. Whether it was the Red Falcon used by the Great Zhou Army or the Great Western Continent's Heaven Messenger Bird, or even Nank and the fastest Silver Dragon, none of them could be faster than her. The problem was that she was injured. The even greater problem was that she was carrying a person in her hands. That person was unconscious and as heavy as a wet sack of flour. If she lost this person, it would be very difficult for Nank to catch up. She could return to the garden where the human cultivators gathered and launch a counterattack against the demons, or she could find a place to temporarily hide. Once she recovered from her injuries and was cured of the poison, she could fight with Nank again. She was confident that she could definitely win. But she could not, so there were no ifs. In the entire process, she did not even glance at the person in her hands. No matter who it was, it did not matter. No matter how heavy he was, she could not throw him away. Just like Nank had said at the peak of Sunset Valley, she had always carried the word responsibility on her shoulders to survive. Many choices had already become instinctive to her. She did not need to think about right or wrong or the pros and cons. She just did it. Two streams of light flashed through the forest and the wetland at the edge of the grassland. Their colors were slightly different. Wherever they passed, grass fragments flew and leaves were shaken into silk. She was still unable to break away from Nank. Her vision became more and more blurry, which was a sign that the peacock's poisonous blood was gradually corroding her sea of consciousness. She had always used the true blood of the heavenly phoenix to suppress it, but after this chase, the blood gradually boiled, and she was actually somewhat unable to suppress it. Perhaps she could ignite the true blood of the heavenly phoenix to increase her speed, but what about the poison? Nank's figure grew closer and closer. In the darkness of the night, the periphery of the grassland was dyed green once more. She didn't have time to think. In fact, she didn't even have time to think before she made her decision. At this moment, she finally lowered her head to look at the person in her hand. She thought somewhat helplessly, "We're all cultivators, and we pay particular attention to eating the breeze and eating the starlight. What exactly do you eat every day to make you so heavy?" Then, she ignited the remaining heavenly phoenix true blood in her body. With a muffled boom, the periphery of the grassland began to burn, and one could vaguely see the glow of water under the grass. Su Yorong turned into a line of fire and disappeared from the heavenly cemetery. After a while, Nank arrived and stopped. She gazed at the line of fire in the distance with an indifferent expression. It was unknown what she was thinking. The green feathers of the vermilion bird gently swayed, and a chill spread in all directions. The burning weeds and reeds were gradually extinguished, leaving behind a scorched earth. The speed obtained by the heavenly phoenix igniting its true blood was so fast that she had no way of catching up. Soft-hearted, unable to see the big picture, petty, Nank's evaluation of Su Yorong was very cold and disdainful. Even if you can survive this time, how can you still be my opponent? She was very clear that in this kind of situation, even if the heavenly phoenix soul in Su Yorong's body awakened, it would be very difficult for her to survive. The green feathers of the vermilion bird slowly retracted, and the light changed slightly. The two women appeared on either side of her, kneeling on the ground. With trembling voices they said, "Servant greets master, servant is useless." Nank did not pay any attention to her two maids. She did not even glance at their faces that were deathly pale from fear. She thoughtfully asked, "That person was Chen Chongxing?" The two maids hurriedly gave a brief account of what had happened on the other side. For the first time, a smile appeared on Nank's small face, but it was still very cold. So it wasn't soft-hearted, nor was it unable to see the big picture. Rather, it was due to excessive concern, for the two of you to die together is rather interesting. The night wind blew against her face. It should have been cold, but because her blood was currently boiling and burning, the wind also became warm. Su Yorong wanted to go to the mountainside Whispering Wood, but her heavenly phoenix true blood had already been completely burned away. She could no longer endure. She glanced behind her, and after confirming that Nank had not followed, she flew several li to the northwest and landed on the ground. She had been flying along the edge of the plains of the unsetting sun the entire time. The reason was very simple, and Nank was also very clear on it. It was only like this that she had been able to endure for so long at the very beginning. The place where she had landed was naturally still the edge of the plains. It was a large wetland, and within it grew an endless expanse of reeds. The reeds were like a small island, and the surrounding reeds were very tall, just enough to block the view from the outside world. It was like a world isolated from the rest of the world. There were no stars in the night sky of the Garden of Zhou. The light reflected off the surface of the water between the reeds came from the pair of wings of fire. They were like countless mirrors, and it was very beautiful. With a thought from Su Yorong, the golden flames slowly extinguished, and the two wings were actually as pure as snow. Her brow slightly creased, and she seemed to be in some discomfort. Deep within her eyes that were like the limpid autumn waters was a hint of green that made people feel uneasy. Around the green were some golden sparks that incessantly burned, but they were very dim, as if they could be extinguished at any moment. Then, she once more turned to the human cultivator that she had saved. For some reason, she felt that this person was rather familiar. Although her vision was rather blurry from the poison, and she could not even make out his facial features, she could only vaguely see that his face was very pale. But for some reason, even though he was unconscious, he still gave her a steady and amiable feeling. Because of this feeling, she stared blankly. Then exhaustion overtook her. She sat down cross-legged, closed her eyes, and began to adjust her breathing. The pure white wings slowly retracted, and like the warm quilt in the divine general's estate, they wrapped around her body. The wings formed a pair. The other pure white wing slowly descended and gently covered Chen Chongxing's body. The first volume coincided with the end of the student's junior year. Chapter 284. It was currently late at night, and the indistinct halo of light still hung over the horizon. As a result, the reeds at the edge also received some light. Su Yorong opened her eyes and woke up. The crystal in her hand had already turned into useless powder. The true essence in her body had recovered a little, but it could only barely suppress the poison in her blood. Could not solve all the problems. With a thought, she retracted her pure white wings. Her fingers touched something, and only then did she remember that she had saved a human cultivator. Her fingers touched the pulse of the human cultivator, and after a while, her eyebrows slightly rose. She seemed rather surprised. The amount of true essence in this human cultivator was rather thin, and it was not the result of battle. There seemed to be some problem with his meridians. With this kind of cultivation talent, he was actually able to enter ethereal opening and obtain the qualifications to enter the Garden of Zhou. It could be imagined that this person had to be extremely diligent in his cultivation. It was a pity that this person's luck was too terrible. The Garden of Zhou was so large, yet he had actually encountered Nank's two wings. He was heavily injured, and if he did not receive treatment soon, he would definitely die. Another reason for this person's terrible luck was her current situation. She had used up all her true essence and lost a lot of blood. It was simply impossible for her to use the sacred light technique to treat him. She stood up and shook her head at the depths of the plain, then turned around and looked in the opposite direction. She saw that on the other side of the reeds, not far away was dry land, and a little further away was a forest. She could faintly make out a cliff. If she followed this cliff, she should be able to walk into a garden where human cultivators gathered. She still remembered that there were many caves in that cliff. Looking at the dense forest on the other side of the reeds, she said nothing. Yes, she only remembered, but she could not see clearly. Right now, her vision was still a blur. She felt that that person was too miserable, but her own situation was even worse. In order to escape Nank's pursuit, she had burned too much of the heavenly phoenix's true blood. The poison in her blood had already begun to spread, and her vision and 5 senses had all been greatly damaged. If she could not leave the Garden of Zhou in time, she really would die here. At the peak of Sunset Valley, the phoenix's soul had awakened, but what was the point? Without a fleshly body, no matter how strong the soul was, what use was it? Without a wick, how could a flame exist? Would she die here? The gentle breeze of the plain blew over, and the temperature was lowered by the water beneath the weeds and reeds. It was somewhat chilly. Her expression was still calm, but her hands were trembling slightly, as if she wanted to catch the wind but couldn't. She calmly gazed at the mountains of the Garden of Zhou. Slowly, for some reason, she suddenly became angry. Yesterday, before leaving the mountainside Whispering Wood for the last time, she had heard from her senior sister from Holy Maiden Peak that Chen Chongqing and the Wolf Tribe youth had quietly left. From the looks of it, they were heading upstream. As the next Holy Maiden of the South, she knew many secrets. Although she was not certain, she was certain that the entrance to the Sword Pool was somewhere upstream of that stream. Chen Chongqing's destination was the Sword Pool. The upper reaches of the stream, the summit of Sunset Valley, and this patch of reeds were separated by several hundred li. Even if Chen Chongqing and Zhixiu could fly, they would still not be able to reach this place. That was why she was angry now. She had never hidden her feelings towards Chen Chongqing. She had never liked this fiancé that she had never met, but there was a marriage contract between her and that person after all. Therefore, she naturally had some guesses and even hopes for him. She had hopes, but now she was disappointed. She gazed at the mountains of the Garden of Zhou, gazed at the distant upper reaches of the stream, and felt an indescribable anger towards that fellow. He doesn't even have the slightest sense of the overall situation. He only knows how to save people and treat the injured. Could it be that he can't see that this is a demon plot? His way of doing things is so petty. It really is infuriating. The chaos in the Garden of Zhou was definitely related to the demons. She had thought of this point, which was why she had walked the lonely mountain path of Sunset Valley last night. If Chen Chongqing and Zhixiu had the same idea as her and worked together, then with the addition of Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian, the 2 members of the Divine State's 7 laws, they would definitely be able to destroy the demon plot. However, Chen Chongqing had gone to find the Sword Pool, so she had made this evaluation. She did not remember that at the summit of Sunset Valley, Nank had also made this evaluation of him. Shuang really wasn't wrong. On the surface, he seems honest, kind, and benevolent, but at the crucial moment, you can see that his bones are filled with indifference and selfishness. At this moment, he still feels that the sword pool is more important than anything else. Only, why would that guy be the same as me, running around in the Garden of Zhou for 2 nights, not hesitating to save so many people? Su Yorong creased her brow and thought for a while. Finally, she came up with an answer. Chen Chongqing had done those things on purpose, to save those people for her to see. He wants to use this kind of method to obtain my good impression? He really is a hypocritical guy. Her mood was somewhat strange. She stopped thinking about it and turned to look at the cultivator that she had saved. Because her vision was blurry, she had to lower her head and get extremely close. Only then was she able to see that person's face a little more clearly. The person was unconscious, his brow tightly furrowed, but he still gave off an honest and steady feeling, making people want to get close to him. His age was around 20 years old. He seems like an honest person. At such a young age, he's already at ethereal opening. Perhaps he's a favored core disciple of some sect. Perhaps he's even one of the top 3 in this year's grand examination. It's a pity that his corpse will be exposed in the wilderness. She confirmed that she had no way of saving this person and couldn't help but feel a little regretful. She shook her head with a little pity, then extended her hand and felt around the person's body, hoping to find something that could prove his identity. Unexpectedly, she found nothing, only a very ordinary dagger without any insignia on it. She remembered that when she was saving the person last night, she seemed to have seen a very strange weapon in his hand. It seemed to be shaped like an umbrella, but she didn't know where it had gone. Her brow creased, as if thinking of something. She turned around and walked towards the land on the other side of the reed marsh. The lake water had soaked her dress, leaving a mark on the beach outside the forest. In the instant that Su Yorong's figure disappeared into the forest, an extremely thin shadow, like lightning, fell into the reed thicket. The reeds swayed in the wind. A chi suddenly appeared and then disappeared. A little girl wearing a black dress appeared at Chen Chongqing's side. At her waist was a jade scepter. The little girl's expression was indifferent. Her vertical pupils were as dark as her dress, making the red mole between her eyebrows even more vivid. She was the Black Dragon. Chen Chongqing called her Jiji or sometimes Hong Zhuang. She gazed at the unconscious Chen Chongqing, a hint of worry and confusion faintly appearing in the depths of her indifferent eyes. "Weren't you on the other side of the cliff? How did you suddenly appear here?" As a noble and powerful black frost dragon, even if she was just a strand of her soul, she only needed a glance to see that Chen Chongqing's body was already riddled with holes. Only then did she know that he had suffered such heavy injuries. If no one saved him, he would assuredly die. "How did you end up with that woman?" She gazed at the forest on the other side of the reed thicket, her brow rising in displeasure as she thought, "Chen Chongqing, you idiot, what did she promise you? How could you trust a human woman?" To her, the most painful memory of humanity, besides the long-vanished Wang Jitsa, was that woman, the Tianhai Divine Empress. Su Yorong was very similar to the young Tianhai Divine Empress, and coupled with the fact that Chen Chongqing had spoken of that engagement, she was innately wary of Su Yorong and had no good impression of her. She had seen the scene of Su Yorong saving Chen Chongqing last night, and then she had searched the Garden of Zhou for a very long time before finally finding these two. Unexpectedly, she had seen Su Yorong leave once more. This only increased her disgust for Su Yorong. In her view, the reason Su Yorong had risked her life to save Chen Chongqing last night was because demons had been watching from the side. And now, Su Yorong had left Chen Chongqing here to wait for death because no one had seen it. The reason for this was because Su Yorong deeply valued her reputation. She viewed it as even more important than the lives of others, even her own. This sort of woman was truly cruel, hypocritical, and frightening. She recalled the letter Chen Chongqing had once told her in the underground cavern, recalled those 4 words, and her small face revealed an expression of loathing. To leave Chen Chongqing in this patch of reeds and leave on her own, to have him slowly and helplessly wait for death, was this the take care of yourself she had said in the letter? She had no good impression of humans, except Chen Chongqing, so she was somewhat angry. Moreover, she had invested a great deal of blood and sweat into Chen Chongqing, true blood and sweat. She could not permit Chen Chongqing to die like this, or else all that blood and sweat would be wasted. Thus, the first thing she had to do was to keep Chen Chongqing alive. How could she cure the wounds in Chen Chongqing's body? She thought of a method, and an indescribable feeling of shame and anger appeared on her forehead. That dark red mole on her face became somewhat brighter. "Remember, you owe me another life," she hatefully said to the unconscious Chen Chongqing. After saying this, she leaned over and embraced Chen Chongqing, nestling in his embrace. Then, she transformed into a black light and entered his body. A qi of utmost cold and purity was released from Chen Chongqing's chest, and then it gradually retreated back into his body. There were many tiny wounds on the surface of Chen Chongqing's internal organs, and they were constantly bleeding. They were frozen by this extremely cold qi, and the bleeding gradually stopped. At the same time, his blood flow and breathing began to slow. A thin layer of frost formed on the surface of the water in the reed. A layer of frost also formed on Chen Chongqing's forehead. At the same time, a jade rui appeared on his wrist. After a while, the sound of splashing water could be heard. Su Yorong walked out of the forest. Holding her dress, she walked back into the reeds, but it was unknown what she had just gone to do. Seeing the layer of frost on Chen Chongqing's forehead, and sensing that the environment was slightly colder than before, she slightly raised her eyebrows. She felt that something had happened, but around the reeds there was clearly nothing. She took out the faded star plate, and her fingers seemed to carelessly fiddle with it a few times. The faded star plate did not give any instructions. Those lines were extremely messy and chaotic, just like the starless night sky of the Garden of Zhou. Nothing could be seen. Her injuries were too heavy, and she could not walk back to the garden where the human cultivators gathered, so where should she go next? She grabbed Chen Chongqing's belt and walked to the other side of the river, just like she was carrying a bundle. Because she was not tall, Chen Chongqing's face would occasionally dip into the water, creating a splash in the reeds and startling a few fish. Just what does this person eat every day? He doesn't look fat, so why is he so heavy? She thought to herself. After discussing and debating with my friend for an entire day, I finally confirmed all the plots in the Garden of Zhou. Very good. Tonight, I will complete the outline. The main text is just this chapter. Chapter 285. The warm morning light shone on the pool of water at the edge of the plain, reflecting a faint luster. Nank stood on the shore of the pool, her expression indifferent as she gazed forward. She raised her right hand, and fresh water was delivered to her, allowing her to bring the medicine to her lips. After the 2 maids helped her eat the medicine, they handed her a wet towel and helped her wash her face. After a while, her spirit recovered a little, and she lightly waved her hand in front of her face. Although there were aquatic plants everywhere, there were not many mosquitoes or flies in the Garden of Zhou. Her actions were not to drive something away, but to create a black curtain. On the black curtain, there was a rough outline of the map of the Garden of Zhou, as well as a few flickering dots of light. These were the life lamps that Black Robe had lit, indicating the position of their enemies. There were 2 life lamps in the plain, sometimes to the east, sometimes to the west. In the blink of an eye, they were several dozen li away, as if they were being interfered with by some sort of power, making it impossible to determine their position. They were probably Zhixiu and Qijian. They were already deep in the plain, and logically speaking, they had no chance of survival, so Nank was not worried. Her gaze rested more on the other 2 life lamps. Those 2 life lamps belonged to Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing, and they were extremely eye-catching on the black curtain. They were located at the edge of the plain, very far from the gardens where the human cultivators had gathered. Moreover, it had already been a very long time since they had moved. This seemed to indicate that the 2 of them no longer had the strength to escape, and it was probably not long before she completed the mission that Black Robe had given her. At some point, the zither-playing old man had arrived from the peak of Vale Valley and met up with Nank and her 2 maids. Seeing the life lamps on the black curtain, he was not as confident and composed as Nank, and was rather worried. Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing are both heavily injured, so they should not be able to walk back to those gardens. But there are still some human cultivators hiding in the mountains of the Garden of Zhou, and most of them are at the peak of Ethereal Opening. If Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing meet up with those human cultivators as they flee, what should we do? The plot that Black Robe had personally devised had fully utilized the special conditions and geographical environment of the Garden of Zhou. He had seen through the greed of human cultivators before wealth and cultivation methods, and had a perfect grasp of the human heart. As a result, only a few demon experts had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou, but it was enough to throw the entire Garden of Zhou into chaos. If it were not for Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing, perhaps the Garden of Zhou would have already become a true hell. The problem was that the human cultivators had already sensed the demon race's plot, and the majority of them had gathered together. If they were to engage in direct combat, no matter how strong the demon experts were, they would not be able to fight against several hundred human cultivators. Nank's expression remained indifferent, and she did not explain anything. She only said, if Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing were to encounter other human experts in this sort of situation, perhaps they would die even earlier. The splashes of water between the reeds and the shore gradually calmed, and then a thin layer of ice covered it. Chen Chongqing's body was drenched, and the water droplets very quickly condensed into frost. His eyebrows and temples were dyed with snow, as if his hair had long since grown gray. He, who had already matured early, now seemed to have gone through a lot of vicissitudes. Su Yorong naturally noticed the abnormality of his body. She slightly raised her eyebrows and once again took his pulse. She discovered that his true essence was as thin as before, but the injuries to his internal organs had stabilized. It was just that his heartbeat and breathing were much slower than those of a normal person, but she did not know whether it was because of the special cultivation method that he cultivated, or the omen of death. Because of the poison, her vision was still blurry. She could only vaguely make out this person's face, which was covered in frost and seemed rather mature. She was quiet for a while, then suddenly extended her hand to wipe away the frost on his face. Afterwards, she stared blankly, not understanding why she had done this. She walked into the forest enveloped in the morning light, and silently stepped on the soft fallen leaves. After walking for several dozen zhang, she once again stopped, and gazed at a distant cliff in front of her. Within the forest, there was a path that had been trodden by predecessors. Although it was covered by the fallen leaves, one could still faintly see traces of it. It extended forward, and then turned at the edge of the cliff, forming a zigzag. She gently placed Chen Chongqing on the fallen leaves, took out the tong bow, and drew the bowstring to a semicircle. She took aim, but did not speak. The morning wind accompanied the morning light into the forest. The morning light was concealed by the leaves, and the forest was very quiet. The morning wind, however, was not shredded by the tree branches. It softly blew against the hair by her face. Those strands of hair would occasionally lightly touch the bowstring, but did not make a sound. It was like the softest of fingers lightly pressing down on the bowstring, ready to explode with a powerful sound in the next moment. Some leaves were blown off the branches by the wind, slowly drifting down in the hazy and dusky world before her eyes, until they landed at her feet. The bough did not move, and her eyelashes did not blink. Her expression was calm and focused. She only stared at that cliff, at that place devoid of people. Just as that leaf fell in front of her feet, an elderly voice came from the cliff. "Is it a friend?" Following this voice, the first thing that appeared outside the cliff was a hand. A gray string was tied to that wrist, and the hand held a wooden tablet. On the wooden tablet, an extremely complicated sect insignia had been drawn with vermilion paint. She did not know what was so strange about the paint, but even from so far away, she could clearly feel the heat and dryness from it. All the human cultivators that entered the garden of Zhou had a gray string, and the sect insignia on the wooden tablet indicated their identity. It was just a simple action, but it represented many meanings, and could do as much as possible to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. From this detail, it could be seen that the owner of that elderly voice was extremely cautious. Su Yorong could only vaguely see a blurry image, and could not clearly see the details. However, from the calm expression on her face, it was impossible to see this. From that person's voice, she could hear an intense wariness and vigilance. She thought about the routine and bloody battles after the opening of the Garden of Zhou, and then thought about how she was covered in blood. It was indeed easy to misunderstand. She said, "Not an enemy." This was the first time they had met, so they naturally could not be considered friends, but they were also not opponents. This was the explanation she gave. After a while, a person walked out from the other side of the cliff. That person had a head full of white hair, and an elderly face. He was at least over 100 years old. His expression and pace were very calm and steady, but he did not conceal his vigilance. Although he had walked out, his right hand that hung by his waist held a magical artifact, as if he could strike at any time. He maintained what he saw as a safe distance from Su Yorong. This distance was very particular. It allowed him to feel safe, and it also allowed her to feel at ease. If it was not a senior that had experienced many years of wind, frost, snow, and rain, it would be impossible for him to have such an exquisite sense of propriety. Su Yorong sensed that the other party did not conceal his qi, and confirmed that this old man was an expert at the peak of ethereal opening. Her heart tightened slightly, but the expression on her face relaxed. She loosened the bowstring, gripped the longbow, and said, "May I ask for Senior's esteemed name?" The rules of the Garden of Zhou had always been bloody and violent. Moreover, the human cultivators that were not in the three gardens and were still hiding in the wilderness were often expert. They had ideas about the treasures and legacies of the Garden of Zhou. Meeting with such people would probably result in a fierce battle. It must be known that it was extremely likely that the other party did not know that the demons had already infiltrated the Garden of Zhou. As a result, she calmly and straightforwardly continued, "The demons have already infiltrated the Garden of Zhou, and we have been injured by a sneak attack from the demons." This was still an explanation, but there was a hidden meaning in the explanation. The demons that were able to infiltrate the Garden of Zhou were certainly powerful, but if they needed a sneak attack to injure her, then she must also be very powerful. It was unknown whether the old man had obtained the conclusion she wanted him to obtain from her seemingly careless explanation. This was because it was very obvious that the old man was just as she had guessed. From the moment he entered the Garden of Zhou, he had always been hiding in the wilderness, deliberately avoiding contact with other cultivators. As a result, he still did not know that the demons had entered the Garden of Zhou. After hearing her words, he was very shocked. How did the demons enter the Garden of Zhou? The old man was very shocked, but he did not show any fear. He looked at the gray string on his wrist and sneered. No wonder so many strange things happened. It was very obvious that he had already completed his treasure hunt in the Garden of Zhou and found what he needed. As a result, he had tried to ignite the gray string and leave, but he had failed. Su Yorong did not explain, because the demon's plot was too complicated, and there was no need. The old man looked at Chen Chongqing on the fallen leaves behind her. Seeing his body covered in frost, he felt slightly astonished and asked, "This person is your companion?" Su Yorong shook her head and said, "I don't recognize him." I only saw him being attacked by demon experts and just happened to save him. Even at that kind of time, you still didn't forget to save someone. You're not bad, little girl. The old man looked at her with an expression of praise and then said, "But where are you going?" Su Yorong said, "The human cultivators are currently gathered in 3 gardens. I was originally prepared to bring this fellow cultivator over, but because I was injured, I couldn't go very fast. It would take at least half a day, and I was worried that the demons would catch up. I didn't want to meet Senior, so I'd like to trouble Senior to notify other fellow cultivators to come and receive us." The old man showed an expression of disapproval and said, "We can travel together. I'll send you over. How can I let you stay here and risk your lives?" Su Yorong said, "The demon experts that have infiltrated the Garden of Zhou are very strong. If Senior wants to take care of the 2 of us, I'm afraid." Her words had an endless meaning, but they were good intentions. The old man smiled and said, "If we were outside the Garden of Zhou, we might have to be a little more careful. But in the Garden of Zhou, I actually want to meet those demon experts that you speak of." His smile was very free and easy, his expression calm and at ease, and his eyes warm and bright. When he said those words, he seemed extremely confident. An expert at the peak of ethereal opening should be an invincible existence in the Garden of Zhou. The old man's confidence naturally had its reasons. For some reason, Su Yorong did not tell him that the demon experts that had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou were even more terrifying than normal peak ethereal opening experts, not to mention that there was a terrifying existence like Nank. She revealed an expression of curiosity and respect and asked, "May I ask who Senior is?" The old man said, "My surname is Bai, and my name is Hai. I've cultivated in the Setting Sun sect for over 200 years. I very rarely leave the sect to travel, so I presume that you don't know me." Su Yorong was slightly startled, as if she was somewhat at a loss about this name. In reality, she felt rather cold. The next chapter was around 10 o'clock. Chapter 286. The Setting Sun sect was an extremely special sect on the continent. It did not belong to either the north or south branches of the orthodoxy. This was because the cultivation method of this sect did not use starlight as its foundation, but rather used earthly fire as its source of energy. The mountain gate of this sect was located next to a remote volcano in the western Antarctic. The cultivators of the sect rarely appeared in the world, but who would have thought that this year when the Garden of Zhou opened, there would actually be people from this sect? If it was a normal cultivator, they would have probably never heard of the Setting Sun sect, as the old man had said. But she was no ordinary cultivator. As the next holy maiden of the south, whether it was in the capital of the Great Zhou dynasty or later in the South Stream Temple, besides cultivating and comprehending the heavenly tomes, she also had to learn about the various sects of the continent, so she knew about the Setting Sun sect. She also knew that this old man named Bai Hai was an elder of the Setting Sun sect. He was powerful, but his temperament was cold and bloodthirsty. "So it's a senior from the Setting Sun sect." Her voice paused in the middle, as if she was a disciple of an ordinary sect who didn't know of the Setting Sun sect. She repeated herself out of courtesy. The Setting Sun sect elder, Bai Hai, looked at her with interest and asked, "Which sect are you from?" Su Yorong bowed, her expression respectful as she replied, "Junior is an elf and does not belong to any sect." Bai Hai's expression was a little strange, apparently not expecting this girl to be an elf. Then he said, "Let's go." After saying this, he walked towards Su Yorong, very naturally, as if he was going to help her lift up Chen Chongxing, who was lying among the fallen leaves. "Yes, senior." After saying this, Su Yorong picked Chen Chongxing up from the fallen leaves and walked towards the other side. Her actions were very natural, like a well-behaved young girl obeying her senior's orders. No matter if it was her or Bai Hai, neither of them noticed that Chen Chongxing's eyelids slightly trembled, as if he was about to wake up, but ultimately didn't. There was a rustling sound on the fallen leaves. It was the sound of the soles of the shoes. Every sound meant that the distance between them was shortened. Bai suddenly stopped and indifferently said, "You've suffered such heavy injuries. Give this fellow Taoist to me." Su Yorong replied with a calm expression, "Thank you for your kindness, senior. My injuries aren't serious and I can still hold on, so there's no need." At this moment, the two of them were still separated by more than 100 feet. But no one took another step forward. The sound of the falling leaves no longer rang out, and the forest became incomparably quiet once more. One could even say that it was dead silent. After a long time, another sigh sounded in the forest. Bai had a regretful expression as he looked at her and sighed, "From the moment we met until now, there are no loopholes at all. It's perfect." Su Yorong looked at him and said calmly, "You too." It was very clear that she no longer called him senior, and the word "you" had also changed back to. Bai slightly raised his eyebrows, somewhat puzzled as he asked, "Previously, from a distance of over 1,000 feet, you could have drawn your bow and shot me, so why didn't you? Don't say you didn't see through me then." Very naturally, he no longer considered himself as a senior, and the word "you" became a respectful "you." Su Yorong did not explain. This was because she did not want her opponent to know that her true essence had been exhausted, and that she was unable to guarantee that the Wu arrow could kill a peak ethereal opening expert from a distance. If they were any closer, just like now, as long as the other party took one more step forward, she would have tried to shoot him dead. Unfortunately, the other party didn't. Therefore, she was actually feeling very regretful at this time. Bai looked at her and asked, "Your Highness had long since seen through my intentions?" Su Yorong's silence was a tacit admission. Bai asked, "Why?" "I believed that my acting was very good." Su Yorong's answer was very simple. "Intuition." Bai was very moved. He sighed. "This is probably the legendary innate talent." After saying these words, he sent a palm flying through the air towards Su Yorong's face. A dark red flame appeared at the edge of his palm. As the palm moved forward, it transformed into dozens of palms, enveloping Su Yorong from all directions. The sky within the forest turned a dark red. These dark red flames seemed to be slightly heavier than normal flames, as if they possessed some sort of substance. It was like the seemingly dark underground, but incomparably hot magma. The green leaves on the branches suddenly curled, the bark began to crack, and the temperature abruptly rose. In the next moment, these dark red flames would engulf Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing within. At the same time that Bai sent out his palm, Su Yorong's right foot stomped on the ground. With a light paw, the fallen leaves around her and Chen Chongqing jolted up from the ground and danced in the air. The fallen leaves were unable to block the tens of thousands of palm silhouettes of dark red flames. With a boom, they immediately began to burn, transforming into a violent sea of fire. It was precisely this sea of fire that blocked Bai's line of sight and the killing intent contained within the tens of thousands of palm silhouettes. This was the principle of using fire to counter fire. Borrowing the cover of the violent burning sea of fire, Su Yorong carried Chen Chongqing, transformed into a blur, and flashed into the cliff outside of the forest. That was the only place that Bai's palm of fire couldn't cover, and it was also a place that she had long since set her sights on. If the cliff was a physical object, it naturally couldn't be entered, but that cliff had a cave. Before this conversation that was filled with hidden killing intent, she had already discovered this cave, and at the same time made calculations. If she couldn't seize the initiative in this battle, she had also prepared an escape route for herself. This cave was the escape route, but there was no escape route. The sea of fire within the forest was slightly disturbed. Bai broke through the air, his expression solemn, and once again made his move. Tens of thousands of palm silhouettes of dark red flames suddenly condensed into a perfectly straight line of fire, directly exploding towards Su Yorong's back within the cave. This elder of the setting sun sect knew what kind of person the girl he wanted to kill today was, so he didn't dare to hold back at all, nor did he leave himself any path of retreat. His first move was his most powerful setting sun palm, and he even used the entirety of his cultivation in this attack. Su Yorong turned around, looking at that terrifying line of fire, her expression still serene. With a flip of her wrist, she stabbed the tong bao into the ground. The ground within the cave was very hard. With a crisp crack, the stone surface cracked inch by inch, and the bottom of the tong bao pierced deep into the ground, even higher than her person. In an instant, countless branches sprouted from the tong bao, and countless green leaves sprouted from the tip. In the space deformed by the line of fire, they faintly swayed, bringing with them an extremely fresh and clean qi that filled the entire cave. This process was very difficult to describe with words. A long period of time condensed into a fragment of time. 100-year-old tree, how many years did it take to build a palace? This was the growth of a lonely wudong tree, and also the construction of a palace. The tong bao became a wudong tree, and a tong palace was built. Yes, it was the tong palace of the great Zhou imperial palace, the palace that had once imprisoned Shen Chongqing for a day and a night. The wudong, as one of the two unique divine weapons on the tier of legendary weapons, actually had such a wondrous use. The previous holy maidens of South Stream Temple had actually attached the Tong Palace to the Tong Bao. The Tong Palace was a kind of array. It was extremely powerful when used to trap enemies, and incomparably tenacious when used for defense. There was a boom, the sound of the fire rapidly expanding, and also the sound of the waves of fire crashing against the stone wall. At the mouth of the cave, the flames burned to the heavens, and the verdant leaves of the wudong tree seemed on the verge of igniting. However, that line of fire could not even take one step past the wudong tree. This was the wudong tree that the phoenix perched on. The phoenix was fire, its blood was fire, and its body was also fire. It had accompanied it for countless years, and the wudong tree was filled with fire essence and fire intent, so how could it be afraid of fire? Let alone the flames of the setting sun palm, even if this longbow was thrown into the setting sunset's stream of earth fire, it would not be damaged in the slightest. The green branches stretched out, separating the cave into two worlds, blocking the blazing earth fire and Bai Hai outside. Separated by the flames, Su Yorong gazed at Bai Hai with a calm expression, saying nothing. Bai Hai's expression was very solemn, but he did not feel any sense of defeat because the flames he summoned could not break through the defenses of the Tong Bao. He looked at her and said, "My setting sun sect is established in the Valley of Hidden Fire. Besides the blazing and terrifying earth fire, there is mostly miasma there. That miasma and the earth fire mutually reinforce and counteract each other. I very much want to know if this longbow of yours can withstand it." Saying this, he put away the setting sun palm and walked up to the wudong tree. Without hesitation, he once more slapped down with his palm. This time there was no blazing flame, only a faint and bizarre qi, accompanied by countless specks of dust, that sprayed out from his palm and landed on the trunk and leaves of the wudong tree. In an instant, the verdant wudong tree seemed to have stopped in the sand-filled north for several years. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, no longer exuding its former vitality. This dust was composed of extremely fine specks of dust. Each speck of dust was the essence of the fire miasma that Bai Hai had collected over the centuries of breathing in the Valley of Hidden Fire. The gradual dimming of the exterior was not important. What was frightening was that these specks of dust were constantly corroding the Tong Bao's body. On the verdant leaves of the wudong tree, many tiny specks of gray had already appeared, and these specks were still expanding at a visible rate. Many terrifying cracks had also appeared on the bark of the tree, and they were still constantly deepening. In normal times, Su Yorong could rely on her boundless true essence to keep the Tong Bao untouched by the dust, let alone her true phoenix blood. How could it be contaminated by a trifling miasma? But now, she could only rely on the Tong Bao itself to resist the poisonous miasma that came from the depths of the ravine. How long could the tong bough last? Separated by the leaves of the wudong tree, she looked at the elder of the setting sun sect and calmly asked, "Why are you doing this?" Bai Hai replied, "Everyone who enters the garden of Zhou does so for the sake of profit, and I am naturally no exception." Su Yorong said, "Are you sure that the profit you can obtain from me is greater than the risk?" Bai Hai smiled. "I am very sure." Su Yorong indifferently said, "I can give you endless benefits, benefits that you cannot even imagine." In the current continent there were many cultivation sects, each with its own precious secrets, and a strange sect like the Setting Sun sect was even more so. However, she definitely had the qualifications to say such words, and the other party had no choice but to believe her. Bai Hai replied, "To obtain the gratitude of both Holy Maiden Peak and the great Zhou dynasty is naturally hard to come by. Alas, if I did not force you into your current desperate situation, how could I obtain such benefits?" Su Yorong asked, "You've always known who I am?" "Yes, Your Excellency the Holy Maiden. Did I say it wrong? I heard that all the sects of Holy Maiden Peak, whether it's the disciples of the Gentle Stream Monastery or the South Stream Temple, all address you this way." Bai Hai smiled at her. "Last night, under Sunset Valley, I saw your distinguished self unfurl your wings of fire." Su Yorong replied, "You know who I am, yet you still dare to disrespect me? You've already cultivated for more than 200 years. Could it be that you're still unable to control your greed, to the point of insanity?" As she said these words, her expression was very calm, as if she was not angry at all. However, she gave off an air of superiority. Bai Hai calmly replied, "Greed can make people go crazy, but I'm not a true madman. If this were outside the Garden of Zhou, I would definitely be kneeling before my distinguished self and kissing the ground in front of your shoes, but this is the Garden of Zhou, and my distinguished self has already been heavily injured by that demon princess. If I miss this opportunity, I will definitely suffer the wrath of heaven." Su Yorong gazed at the green leaf in front of her and calmly asked, "What do you want from me? This divine artifact? Or something else?" A strange smile appeared on Bai Hai's elderly face. I want my distinguished self's blood. I almost wrote that last sentence as a song. In reality, when I wrote it, I really did sing it. Everyone, I'll see you tomorrow. That's right, tomorrow is Monday, and the stock market will open. Everyone, be careful. Also, friends who don't play in the stock market, don't forget to recommend Heaven Choosing Record. Chapter 287. It was quiet both inside and outside the cave. Only the faint rustling of the poisonous miasma as it corroded the wudong tree could be heard. It sounded like tens of thousands of silkworms gnawing on mulberry leaves, giving off a rather creepy feeling. Su Yorong said nothing. The demons that had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou were true enemies, and she did not have the confidence to defeat this peak ethereal opening elder of the Setting Sun sect. As a result, she had wanted to pay a sufficiently high price to allow him to leave. If he was worried about the revenge of Holy Maiden Peak, she was even prepared to swear an oath on the blood of the true phoenix. However, she had not imagined that he wanted her blood. Whether it was in the scrolls of the Li Palace or in the information from Holy Maiden Peak, both the north and south of the orthodoxy had evaluated this Setting Sun sect elder as callous and bloodthirsty. However, the word bloodthirsty here referred to his personality, and did not mean that he was like those perverted demons who enjoyed eating human flesh and drinking human blood. Otherwise, the Li Palace and Holy Maiden Peak would not have needed to act. The Mountly Sword sect would have killed him long ago. She was somewhat confused, but then she remembered that the cultivation method of the Setting Sun sect was related to the earth fire, and she roughly understood. If the other party wanted his true phoenix blood, then he would naturally not allow him to continue living. Before I began cultivating, I was a scholar in the south. My first dream in life was to pass the imperial examinations, become an official, earn money, and marry a beautiful woman. However, you have lived in Holy Maiden Peak for many years, so you should know that those imperial courts in the south are actually just puppets of the various sects and noble clans. Even if you become a prime minister, you are still just a dog that those cultivators order around. I thought of the events of many years ago and sighed ruefully. After drifting through the seas of officialdom for many years, I finally understood this principle, so I wanted to cultivate. Unfortunately, I was already old, and it was very difficult to cultivate the techniques of the orthodox schools of cultivation to their pinnacle. As a result, I took an unconventional path and entered the Setting Sun sect as a disciple. Speaking of which, I was lucky. My knowledge and accomplishments were extremely high, and my abilities in the Tao were also extremely strong. In only 20 years, I managed to cultivate to ethereal opening. As the poisonous miasma slowly corroded the wudong tree, he and Su Yorong stood inside and outside the cave. They were very close, but they were unable to touch. As a result, he had the time to properly reflect on the past, which could also be considered as an explanation to her. "But this is it," he said somewhat sorrowfully. "I have no way to advance any further. The following 100 years of cultivation were all a waste of my life. I am very unwilling to accept this. I clearly have enough wisdom and experience, and my diligence is not inferior to anyone else's. Why is it that I am still unable to break through to the ethereal opening realm? Is it because his bloodline talent is very ordinary?" At this point, he looked at Su Yorong, who was behind the tree, and did not hide the jealousy and anger in his eyes at all. He said, "But bloodline talent is not determined by oneself, it is randomly distributed by the heavens. Why do people like you have such beautiful bloodline talent, and people like us, no matter how hard we work, can never catch up to you? Why did you reach the upper level of the ethereal opening realm at the age of 15, while I needed more than 100 years? Later on, I finally discovered a secret technique in the sect that could help me break through the threshold of the Nether Passage realm. However, this technique is far too difficult to cultivate. It requires the purest fire crystal to cleanse my marrow and replace my blood. But the sect's earth fire crystal had already been cast into the sword by the founder, and then disappeared with him. Where could I find it? Could it be that I still have the ability to cross the oceans and go to those islands in the southern sea to search for the red dragon? I bitterly searched the world for more than 10 years, but I never made any progress. Finally, I thought of a possibility. Bai turned his body and looked in the direction of the distant plains. He said, "The founder died, and the earth fire crystal disappeared without a trace along with his sword. Back then, he was almost at the Saint Realm. Who could kill him? The greatest possibility was obviously Zhou *****. Then could his sword have been lost in the Garden of Zhou? Could it be in the legendary sword pool? So when the Garden of Zhou opened this year, I entered without hesitation. In truth, I saw the fireworks from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and I even saw a human cultivator poisoned to death by the demons. But so what? Nothing is more important than finding the founder's sword, only. I couldn't find a single trace of that sword here. I couldn't even sense the slightest chi of the earth fire crystal. I despaired." He turned to Su Yorong once more. Because of his age, his eyes were somewhat muddy, and they gradually began to burn with passion. But just when I despaired, I saw my lady unfurl her wings of fire and fly down from the peak of Sunset Valley. I knew that my lady was heavily injured, and I knew that this was my best chance to break through. It might even be my last chance. What does the essence of earth fire count for? The true phoenix blood in my lady's body contains an even more berserk, fiercer, and purer energy. As long as I can take my lady's blood, I can definitely cultivate that secret technique. I can easily break through to ethereal opening and successfully condense fire. In the future, I might even have the chance to step into the divine domain. Do my lady know how great this sort of temptation is to people like us? The more Bai Hai spoke, the more excited he became, the hoarser his voice became. Su Yorong looked at him and said, "I don't know." Bai Hai stared blankly and asked, "What did you say?" "To me, cultivating and breaking through is a very simple matter, just like eating and drinking. From the moment I was born, I was destined to enter the divine domain, so." Su Yorong calmly looked at him and said, "I cannot understand your feelings." When she said these words, she was very indifferent. So Bai Hai was incomparably angry, and also intensely disappointed. If Chen Chongqing were awake at this moment, he would probably be able to understand this setting sun sect elder's feelings. It wasn't because he had experienced this before, but because he was often like Su Yorong, making others feel this way, very seriously speaking the objective truth, but the other party would be forced to endure endless humiliation until they were speechless. Tang 36, who had experienced this deeply, had once evaluated, "You and Su Yorong are both people who make others speechless." Bai Hai truly had nothing to say, so he could only roar, "Bloodline innate gift? The heavens are unfair. In a little while, I will suck your blood dry, and then your bloodline innate gift will be mine. I will change this unfairness." Su Yorong knew the reason, so she no longer paid attention to him. She had no interest in the artistic yelling of a cold-blooded cultivator. She walked to Chen Chongqing's side and sat down cross-legged, beginning to adjust her breathing. At some point, several extremely pure crystals had appeared in her hands. In the garden of Zhou, she could not communicate with the stars in the sky, so she could not sense her own fated star. The true essence that she had painstakingly gathered through the crystals last night was now showing signs of dissipating. This reality made her somewhat unhappy. Although she did not care about Bai Hai's sinister and ruthless methods, as the next holy maiden of the South, for the future of humanity, she had run around in the garden of Zhou for 2 days and nights without rest, fought repeatedly with the demon princess, and was finally forced into a desperate situation. Now, she was going to die at the hands of a human. This also made her feel very unhappy. Separated by the leaves of the wudong tree, Bai Hai saw her slightly raised eyebrows and guessed what she was feeling. He said with slight mockery, "You think it's unfair?" Su Yorong sat cross-legged on the ground, her expression tranquil. Although she did not answer, she felt as if she was saying, "Who dares to think that this is fair? I know you think that humans like me are cold, selfish, sinister, and cunning, but have you ever thought that you're actually no different from us? Do you really think that you're a phoenix? Do you really think that you're as pure and holy as you imagine yourself to be? Do you think that you represent morality?" Bai Hai's aged face revealed an expression of contempt and disdain. He pointed at Chen Chongqing, who was behind her, and said, "Last night I saw you fly down from Sunset Valley and then stealthily chase after him. Although I didn't see how you saved this person, it must have been in front of the demon elites. Then why did you prepare to leave him alone in the reed marsh? I didn't see what you did in the forest, so I presume that it was just one of those cliched psychological struggles. But why did you struggle? Did anyone see why it affected you? It means that what you truly care about is not morality or righteousness, but what other people think of you." Without a doubt, these words were extremely offensive. This elder of the setting sun sect did not know that not long ago, a black dragon girl had made the same evaluation of Su Yorong as he had. Without a doubt, these words were extremely offensive and very difficult to defend against. Su Yorong's expression was calm, as if she had not heard these words at all, as if it was beneath her to defend herself. This sort of disdain was not an act of silence, but rather, she truly did not feel anything towards these words. How others viewed her, she had never truly cared. She did not care what those demon experts thought, and naturally, she also did not care what this shameless human cultivator thought. On the contrary, after hearing Bai Hai's words, she inwardly let out a sigh of relief. This was because these words revealed a piece of information. This person had not seen her leave the reed marshes and go into the forest by the shore to do something. However, Being ridiculed and humiliated like this was ultimately not a very pleasant matter. She turned to Chen Changxing behind her and slightly creased her brow. She thought to herself, if she did not have to bring this person along, she would have already left last night. Even if she had encountered Bai Hai at the cliff, she would have had at least 3 ways to avoid him. She would not have been trapped in this cave like this, and in a little while, he might even drink her blood. Ever since her bloodline had awakened, her status in the human world had been very special. Whether it was the Divine Empress or her holy maiden teacher, they all doted on her. As for her fellow students in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, her fellow disciples from Holy Maiden Peak, and all the other cultivators of the world, when would they dare to show her the slightest disrespect? He actually wanted to drink her blood? This naturally could not be a very pleasant matter. She could not accept it. She took out the faded star plate and her fingers quickly slid across it. Those complex lines constantly changed, forming an even more complex diagram. What is this? This is a faded star? Outside the cave, Bai Hai saw this scene and faintly felt uneasy. Su Yorong ignored this person and continued with her calculations. I will try to finish the next chapter before 9 o'clock. Today is Monday, so I must trouble everyone to vote for me. Chapter 288. It was a pity that in the end, the pattern on the faded star plate was still a blur, just like the Garden of Zhou in her eyes. She could not see her own fate, not even the slightest indication, but in a certain part of the pattern she could see a gray trail. Seeing the fate of others was always simpler than seeing one's own fate. She once again gazed at the unconscious Chen Changxing, somewhat puzzled. Why is this person related to me? Is it because I saved him? It was just that this person's fate was so gray that she could not see any chance of survival. Just as she had confirmed in the reeds, if nothing unexpected happened, this person would undoubtedly die. As long as you are not dead, I will do my best to keep you alive, but, if you are destined to die, can you please die earlier, die by yourself, and not drag me down with you? She looked at Chen Changxing and thought. There was a path of retreat in the cave, but there was no path of retreat. Her true essence was almost exhausted, and the phoenix soul had once again fallen asleep. The Tong Bao could not remain unbreakable forever. More and more gray spots had already appeared on the verdant wudong tree, all traces of the miasma. She lowered her head, her 2 forefingers lightly touching, and muttered to herself, it's fine, Ronger will definitely be fine. At this moment, she was like an ordinary little girl, somewhat wronged, somewhat aggrieved, somewhat flustered. Weakness was only momentary, and grievance was also only momentary. After a while, she calmed down. She had never been an ordinary little girl. She was Su Yorong. She raised her head, her eyes bright. She had decided to take the risk and kill this person. Time was still passing, and they had not traveled too far. The Tong Bao's tree form should still be able to hold on for a little longer, but suddenly, the tree transformed into specks of light and disappeared without a trace at the cave entrance. She rushed out of the cave, her 2 hands drawing 2 lines of fire in the air as she attacked Bai Hai. In a situation where she was clearly at a disadvantage, to remove her final defensive measure and take the initiative to attack was a very brave and unexpected choice. Of course, it was very sudden. However, ever since he made the almost insane decision to seize the phoenix blood last night, Bai Hai had been in his most powerful state. Yes, even he, who was judged to be callous and bloodthirsty, felt that this matter was very insane. This made him excited and nervous like never before, allowing him to maintain his state of cultivation at its peak. Thus, he was able to find traces of Su Yorong, as well as be able to stably receive her counterattack. The wudong tree disappeared, but the poisonous miasma that was still on it turned into dust that filled the air at the cave entrance. Bai Hai's steady and powerful palm broke through the dust and directly collided with the 2 lines of fire that carried a pure and holy aura. With a boom, the smoke and dust inside and outside the cliff cave became even thicker. Then, there was a shrill sound of something tearing through the air. Two afterimages kept moving around, dragging sparks behind them. The temperature in the cave suddenly rose. The line of fire suddenly disappeared, and the palm wind whistled wildly. A figure rapidly retreated into the depths of the cliff cave. Unable to stand firm, he fell heavily on the cliff wall, making a dull sound. The one forced into the cliff cave was Su Yorong. She ignored the pain of the impact and extended her hand to her side. Bai Hai would not give her another chance to adjust her breathing and set up a defense. Transforming into a gray blur, he appeared in front of her. The magical artifact in his hand suddenly glowed brightly, sending the tong bough that she had just grasped back into her hand flying. At the same time, his body moved forward, his withered hand shooting out like lightning and tightly gripping Su Yorong's throat. This battle concluded very quickly. Su Yorong no longer put up any meaningless resistance. She slightly creased her brow. She did not vomit blood, but her face was even paler than before, making her seem very weak. Even in normal times, Bai Hai, who had bitterly cultivated for more than 200 years to reach the peak of ethereal opening, would still be able to put up a fight against her, much less now that she was heavily injured and her true essence exhausted. The final result was not surprising. Bai Hai himself found it somewhat difficult to believe this fact. "You've lost." He looked at Su Yorong, his voice trembling. An unnatural flush appeared on his aged face. It was excitement and agitation, but there was also an element of fear and unease. The reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix had been defeated by him just like that? How could he have won so easily? Somewhat incredulously, he asked, "Just who was it last night that injured you so heavily?" Su Yorong naturally would not answer his question. Her expression remained calm, as if her opponent had not grasped her throat or her fate. This sort of disregard enraged Bai Hai once more. He harshly shouted, "Right now, all I need to do is move a finger and you'll die. In this sort of situation, you still feel it beneath you to speak to me?" Su Yorong calmly glanced at him. She still did not speak, using her silence to express her attitude. Bai Hai was so angry that he began to laugh, his voice becoming somewhat strange. "Don't think that you can provoke me into killing you like this. Relax, I will definitely let you live, and watch as I suck your blood dry." A sliver of loathing finally appeared in Su Yorong's eyes. It was not fear or dread, only loathing. Bai Hai leaned forward and gazed at her face. His voice trembling, he sighed, "Your face, how did you make it? It's actually so real." Su Yorong gazed at this treacherous and aged face and suddenly felt some regret. "I never thought that there would be a day when I would be so close to you." Bai Hai gazed at her eyes that were as bright as autumn waters and let out a teeth-aching laugh. "Ha ha ha ha, this is truly my honor." After saying this, his body leaned forward once more, getting even closer to her. Su Yorong calmly gazed at him. Although she did not speak, she gave off a sacred and inviolable feeling. For some reason, when he gazed into her eyes, Bai Hai suddenly lost all interest in teasing her. He even felt somewhat uneasy. In a slightly hoarse voice, he said, "Relax, I will let you die with dignity. So even if you have some sort of final trick, I hope that you won't use it. Otherwise, I really don't know what kind of outrageous things I will do once my hopes are dashed." Su Yorong turned her head with some difficulty, no longer looking at him, and then closed her eyes. Bai Hai stared blankly and lowered his head to her neck. He had never done this sort of thing before, so he was somewhat nervous. Especially when he thought that she was the inviolable and sacred reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix, a true holy maiden. He became even more nervous, his movements seeming rather clumsy. The next moment, Su Yorong's brow furrowed once more, as if in pain. Bai Hai's pupils rapidly constricted. He felt that this was the most delicious immortal nectar he had ever tasted in his life. But why was it so little? The next moment, he forgot this question. The liquid that flowed into his mouth seemed to contain an inexhaustible flame, as if it was the true essence of the sun. It was countless times purer than the earth fire of the setting sunset. Compared to this, what did the legendary earth fire crystals count for? In just an instant, he felt an inexhaustible amount of energy pour into his body. In just a single mouthful, he became drunk. His grizzled eyebrows floated up and his eyes constantly squeezed together as if he was intoxicated. It was an extremely strange sight. Su Yorong could not see his face, and he could not see Su Yorong's face, so he did not discover that Su Yorong had opened her eyes. She calmly gazed at the stone walls of the cave. For some reason, even though she was already at the edge of the abyss of death, and was currently enduring such humiliation and cruelty, her expression was still very calm, as if she still had the leisure to think about other things. Time slowly passed, but it was so resolute that it inspired fear in one's heart. Suddenly, Su Yorong's eyebrows slightly rose once more, because she realized that she seemed to have miscalculated. Even if she could kill this repulsive old thief, the blood in her body would be sucked clean by him. This time, true regret appeared in her eyes. Although it was very faint, it was still somewhat regretful. She did not want to die like this, and she certainly did not want to die with this old thief's corpse still pressing down on her body. But just like the trajectory of fate in the starry sky, once it began to move, it could not be stopped. This was the decision she had made, her plan. Once it began to be carried out, she would become a part of this plan, no longer capable of preventing the arrival of the conclusion. Was this her fate? She quietly thought. Fate could not be changed. Both the North and South factions of the Orthodoxy believed this. But there were some people who did not believe this. Like Wang Jitsa, like those people who had to change their fate. Su Yorong believed that her fate could not be changed, that she could only perish together with this old thief, ultimately becoming a pair of corpses in the cave that no one would ever discover. She had forgotten that there was another person in this cave. A hand rose up in front of her eyes, bringing her gaze slowly up to her neck. This hand was not very large, its fingernails very clean, its fingers long and slender. They were usually very warm, but now they were very cold, with ice and snow still clinging between the fingers. This hand seemed rather tired and powerless, but it was also very determined. It passed through her black hair, brushed past her earlobe, and then rested on her neck. This hand slowly and firmly covered by Hai's face and then pushed outwards. Push. Recommendation. Chapter 289. Just like how Su Yorong had forgotten about the unconscious Chen Chongqing, Bai Hai had also never paid any attention to the young cultivator covered in frost. Moreover, he was currently intoxicated by the heavenly phoenix's true blood's hallucinatory and supreme bliss and was completely unprepared, thus he was unexpectedly pushed away by that hand. The cliff cave was silent. Bai Hai looked at Chen Chongqing, his expression somewhat stunned. After a moment, he finally understood what had happened and felt that something was wrong. At this moment, a drop of blood still remained at the corner of his lips, coupled with his somewhat warped and aged appearance. He looked abnormally disgusting. Just as that drop of blood was about to drip down, he came to his senses and somewhat flusteredly used the tip of his tongue to curl it into his lips. To him, who wanted to cultivate the setting sun-sect's secret arts and break through to ethereal opening, every drop of Su Yorong's blood was a precious treasure. How could he possibly waste it? However, this scene was unavoidably even more disgusting. For some reason, he felt that the base of his tongue was somewhat sweet, while the tip of his tongue was somewhat numb. He thought to himself, could this be the taste of the heavenly phoenix's blood? During this process, Chen Chongqing supported himself against the cliff wall of the cliff cave and sat up with difficulty. He was currently so weak that it seemed as if a single gust of wind would cause him to collapse once more. How could he possibly defeat his opponent? Bai Hai felt a slight numbing pain on his face and extended his hand to touch it, discovering that it was somewhat wet. He then looked towards Chen Chongqing's palm and discovered that it was also covered in frost, causing him to involuntarily narrow his eyes. Without any warning, he pointed his finger through the air, and a chi that contained a terrifying earth fire shot straight towards Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng seemed to have subconsciously thrust his palm forward, but the air in front of his palm instantly condensed into an ice mirror. The earth fire chi, upon making contact with this ice mirror, made a chi sound and simultaneously turned into green smoke and dispersed. Bai Hai's eyes narrowed even more, looking at him with a strange smile. So you're a disciple of the Snow Mountain sect's secret sect. You think you can block me with Black Frost Jinchi? The Snow Mountain sect was a sect in the northwest of the continent. According to legend, the founder of the Snow Mountain sect possessed the bloodline of the Black Frost Dragon and created a kind of cultivation method on his own. As a result, the sect was established in the extremely cold northwest. At its peak, it was extremely powerful. Neither the demons nor the orthodoxy of the Central Plains were willing to lightly provoke it. However, as time passed, the remaining bloodline of the Black Frost Dragon became fewer and fewer, and the Snow Mountain sect gradually declined in power. Several hundred years ago, it had already attached itself to the Li Palace, and it had been many years since a true expert or promising young disciple had appeared. No one would underestimate a sect that had once been glorious. Just like how South Stream Temple was divided into inner and outer sects, many important figures knew that the Snow Mountain sect also had a branch of the secret sect. It was just that they rarely appeared in the world. The Setting Sun sect cultivated in earth fire, which naturally conflicted with the Snow Mountain sect that cultivated in cold art. In the past, there had been many conflicts between the two sections. As an elder of the Setting Sun sect, Bai Hai naturally understood the Snow Mountain sect very well. Seeing Chen Chongsheng's frost void mirror formed with his horizontal sword, Bai Hai was able to reveal his origins with a single sentence. At the same time, the killing intent within his heart abruptly increased. Su Yorong looked at Chen Chongsheng's face in front of her and thought to herself, so he's a disciple of the Snow Mountain sect's secret sect. No wonder his cultivation method is so special. Her vision was somewhat blurry, but she could clearly feel the tranquility in Chen Chongsheng's eyes. The situation was clearly still dangerous, and Chen Chongsheng was still heavily injured and weak, but for some reason, she suddenly felt that she could relax and leave the rest to this young cultivator. I didn't think that I would actually meet an old friend of the Snow Mountain sect in the Garden of Zhou, and I even more didn't think that before I succeed in my divine technique, I would need to kill you. Bai Hai looked at him and gave a strange smile. Fortunately, this isn't too troublesome of a matter. After saying this, he turned his palm into a blade, bringing with it a streak of flame, and mercilessly chopped at Chen Chongsheng's face. Putting aside the fact that Chen Chongsheng was currently heavily injured and weak, even if he was in perfect condition, he would still not be a match for this elder of the Setting Sun sect. His awakening seemed to have no meaning. It could even be said that he had awakened at the wrong time. The true essence in his body had already dried up. He could not even hold his dagger, let alone summon the yellow paper umbrella. He had no way of blocking this palm of fire. The only thing he could do was raise his palm and strike at his opponent's face. He had just woken up, so he had no idea what had happened, nor did he know who this old man was. He only knew that this old man was doing something very cruel and disgusting. The smile on the old man's face was somewhat stiff and strange, and his laughter was sinister and terrifying. He did not look like a good person, so he wanted to hit him. In the next moment, he could be smashed into pieces by this old man's palm of fire, but he still wanted to hit him. As long as he could hit his opponent's sinister and terrifying old face, then he would not have woken up for nothing. Chen Chongsheng thought this way and also acted this way. But he did not think that his palm would actually be able to hit his opponent's face. But a crisp sound reverberated in the quiet cliff cave. His palm had hit Bai Hai's face. Although his palm movement was light and seemed to be without any strength, the sound was loud and clear. The slap was loud and clear. Bai Hai was stunned, completely unable to understand what had happened. His palm was still in midair, still a foot away from Chen Chongqing. The terrifying earthen fire around his palm was gradually being extinguished, making him look rather miserable. Why was the palm of this disciple of the Snow Mountain hidden sect able to fall on his face? Why had his body become so stiff? Why had the true essence in his body instantly disappeared? In just an instant, countless questions surged into his mind, causing him to be shocked and terrified. In the next moment, all of that fear appeared in his eyes. He twisted his neck with difficulty, lowered his head to look at Su Yurong, who was beside Chen Chongqing, and said his last words. His voice was abnormally hoarse and dry. His words were intermittent, unable to form a sentence, filled with fear and despair. Yao. Yao. Woman. Blood. Blood. Poison. After saying this, he died. The setting sun sect's elder, an expert at the peak of the ethereal opening realm, Bai Hai, died in the cave just like that. When he died, his body was already incomparably stiff, his right hand stopped in midair, and even his eyes could not close. His eyes glowed with a faint green, looking like a statue carved from unbroken jade. This scene was very strange, very sinister. In the next moment, his skin began to fester, but the fester did not penetrate deep into his flesh and bones, only on the surface, gradually becoming mottled. Some of the mottled spots were beautiful, some were disgusting. Chen Chongqing felt very disgusted. At this moment, he finally understood that this old man had already been poisoned, but he did not know when he had been poisoned. The previous strange smile on the old man's face was the cause of the poison's attack. At that time, his divine sense had already gradually separated from his body. Isn't this poison a little too cruel? Immediately after, he remembered that there was someone else in the cave and looked over. The young girl's dress was covered in blood, almost covering up her original whiteness. Her usual delicate beauty was almost covered by her weak and tired expression, but her eyes were still very cold. He was startled and asked, "Are you all right?" Chapter 290. For some reason, Chen Chongqing spoke much slower than usual, as if his tongue was not very nimble, making him seem slow and clumsy. Su Yurong did not reply. With great difficulty, she propped herself up from the ground and powerlessly leaned against the stone walls of the cave. Then, she raised her head. This simple movement caused her face to pale yet again. She looked at the already dead Bai Hai in front of her. She looked at the mottled color on his aged face and said nothing. That moment just now had been the most dangerous moment of her life. She had removed the Tong Bao and pretended to launch a surprise attack. Then, as expected, she had failed. She had intentionally allowed Bai Hai to suppress her so that this elder of the setting sun sect could suck her blood. Because only she knew that her true phoenix blood had been mixed with much of the poison that Nank had planted last night. As expected, this extremely risky and disgusting plan had succeeded. But just as she had thought when she felt remorseful, if Bai Hai had not been pushed away from her neck by that hand at the very last moment, then before he was poisoned to death, he really might have sucked dry the last of her true phoenix essence blood, and then she really would have died. Thinking of this, she turned to Chen Chongqing. Her right hand gripped the Tong Bao and placed it in front of her. Her expression was indifferent, as if she was keeping him at a distance of 1,000 li. The delicate and pretty girl had an apathetic expression, and there was a noble air about her that made her seem extremely virtuous and virtuous. If it were a normal youth, upon seeing this sort of opposite sex, he would perhaps feel ashamed of his inferiority and secretly admire her, or perhaps he would feel that his dignity had been challenged and feel uncomfortable. However, Chen Chongqing did not feel either of these things. In the capital, he had interacted with women like Mou and Luoluo many times, so he was very used to this sort of nobility. As a result, he appeared very calm, but for some reason, He felt that this girl gave him a very comfortable feeling, like a spring forest after a fresh rain. Su Yorong was somewhat surprised at his calmness, but also rather satisfied. Without any movement, the longbow disappeared. Chen Chongqing stared blankly, and then he remembered the words that had faintly entered his ears while he was unconscious. This girl was actually a member of the legendary elf race? It was said that countless years ago, the great western continent and the eastern continent did not have a vast ocean, but were instead joined together. At the time, the great western continent was called the Great Western Ridge, and an elf tribe lived in the Great Western Ridge. This tribe allied with the demi-human race through marriage, leaving behind many mixed-blood descendants. Later on, when the Great Western Continent separated from the continent, these mixed-blood descendants remained in the Eastern Continent. Because they were beautiful and moved quickly, they were called elves. Besides their fresh and elegant appearance, they also inherited the elven tribe's love for nature. The elves were most famous for their archery, and every member of the tribe was extremely skilled in archery. In the war between the demi-human race and the demon race, the elves played an extremely important role. It was also for this reason that they became the most hated target of the demon race. Finally, 2,000 years ago, because of the betrayal of the wolf tribe, the elves' ancestral mountain was besieged by the demon army. The demi-human race was unable to rescue them in time, and the elves were brutally massacred and exterminated. Only a few of the younger members of the tribe managed to escape the mountains through narrow underground tunnels. If this was the end of the story, perhaps it would have been a little better, but in reality, those elves that managed to escape the iron hooves of the demon race welcomed an even more tragic fate. Because of their beautiful appearances and enchanting bodies, the elves were not able to be brought back to the shores of the Red River, so they naturally became the prey of many powerful figures. Whether it was the demon nobles or the human nobles of Shuelao City, they all took pride in having an elf as a servant. The tragic fate of the elves only took a turn for the better when the humans and demi-humans allied against the demon race nearly 1,000 years ago. Emperor Taizong issued a decree forbidding the buying and selling of elves, but the manners of many princes and dukes still secretly kept many elves. It was only when the Great Western Continent's eldest princess married the White Emperor and formed a good relationship with the Tianhai Divine Empress that the enforcement of this ban was constantly strengthened, that the situation finally took a turn for the better. Only after a certain noble clan of the south was exterminated by the Divine Empress for secretly raising and killing several dozen elf slaves did this sort of phenomenon truly cease to exist in the human world. But after experiencing so many years of slavery and torture, the few remaining elves became even fewer. Now, the vast majority of elves lived in White Emperor City or crossed the ocean to the Great Western Continent. In these past few decades, whether it was the capital or Wenshui City, it was very rare to see the figure of an elf. Knowing that this girl was an elf, Chen Chongqing could not help but look at her with some sympathy. He thought to himself, no wonder she was able to enter the garden of Zhou with just a bow and arrow. At the same time, he felt even more at ease with that cold and conflicted look on her face. If he were an elf, he would not have such a good impression of humans either. He had just woken up and there were many things he did not understand. He did not know why he was in this cave, or what was the last light he saw before he fainted. He asked, "It was you who saved me?" Su Yorong calmly replied, "There's no need to thank me." Chen Chongqing did not know how to respond. He thought to himself, "Did I not save you before?" After staring blankly for a moment, he asked, "May I ask who you are?" Su Yorong was slightly taken aback. Only now did she realize that he had not recognized her. It must be known that no matter where she appeared, she would always be recognized. This was because of her extraordinary temperament, and more importantly, she was very beautiful. Note, this had nothing to do with narcissism. This was an objective fact, because she was the publicly acknowledged #1 beauty of the continent. Even the demon nobles of Shuelao City did not have any objections to this. She originally wanted to ask if he did not recognize her, but then she remembered that before she entered the Garden of Zhou, she had already asked the priests of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green to change her appearance, because she did not want to see that guy. Because she thought of that guy, she felt even more exhausted. She whispered, "Can you still walk?" Chen Chongqing had not yet recovered from his heavy injuries and had just woken up from unconsciousness. His entire body was weak, but he did not want to become her burden, so he said, "I can." "Very good, then bring me along." Su Yorong calmly said, "You are not allowed to leave me behind." Chen Chongqing was once again taken aback. He thought to himself, so that's what she meant. He circulated his true qi, confirmed his condition, and then nodded his head. He reluctantly agreed, not because of his mind, but because the condition of his body was truly too terrible. Su Yorong was very clear about the condition of his body, but she did not say any words of comfort or encouragement. In her view, those cliched emotions were just a waste of strength and had no meaning. "I lost a lot of blood, so I'm very weak," she continued. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, "When I woke up, I really did see that old freak sucking your blood, but your eyes were so calm at the time. Moreover, that old freak died from the poison in your blood. It's very obvious that it was a trap you laid down. Why are you saying this now? In addition, why did that old freak want to suck your blood?" Su Yorong saw that he could not understand her meaning and felt somewhat helpless. She said, "I feel very disgusted." Chen Chongqing asked in confusion, and then, Su Yorong said, "I don't want to remember the scene just now, and I'm also very weak, so I want to faint." After saying this, she did not give Chen Chongqing any chance to object or ask any questions. She very straightforwardly closed her eyes, leaned against the wall of the cave, and just like that, fainted. Chen Chongqing was somewhat unprepared by this sudden change, but after thinking about it, he felt that this young girl's words were too reasonable, and he couldn't help but be convinced. He did not immediately bring her away, because he also needed to adjust his breathing and recover some strength. In addition, he needed to carefully examine his own condition. Last night, by the lakeside on the other side of the cold pond, he had fought with those two frightening demon race females for a long time. His internal organs had received extremely serious injuries. He did not want to vomit blood and die the moment he brought the young girl out of the cave. When the soul comes out of the sea of consciousness, it is divine sense. When it comes out of the sea of consciousness, it is meditative introspection. He saw the lake outside of his ethereal palace. What was different from before was that the lake water formed a sphere, and its surroundings were dyed with a lot of ice and snow, emitting a chill in all directions. Even the spirit mountain where his ethereal palace was located was somewhat indistinct. Occasionally, a strong wind would blow by, and the ice and snow would slowly fall. After an unknown amount of time, the wasteland had already been covered in a shallow layer of white. In the battle last night, his true essence had been completely burnt away, and the snow on the wasteland had long since melted away. In the Garden of Zhou, there was no way to sense his fated star, so he was just worried that he would not be able to recover his true essence. When he saw this scene, he was pleasantly surprised, but why was the lake water outside of his ethereal palace so cold? His divine sense pierced through the frost on the surface of the lake, continuing deeper, and then he saw a scene that moved him. A slender black dragon was currently peacefully sleeping in the lake water, constantly emitting its qi. This qi was so cold and so pure. Only now did Chen Chongqing realize that it was just like when he had burned himself in meditative introspection in the underground space. The black dragon had once again saved his life. The cold intent that originated from the depths of the black dragon's soul had helped him recover his true essence, reduce the rate at which his blood flowed, and at the same time, constantly repaired his damaged organs. However, compared to when he was in the underground space, the black dragon was now countless times smaller. Its body curled up in the lake water was like a sleepy child, and it looked very cute. The black dragon was currently only a strand of its soul. In order to save him, it had probably paid an enormous price, which was why it had been sleeping this entire time. If not for it, he would probably have died long ago. He looked at the jade ruby on his wrist and said nothing. Then he looked at the white-clothed girl leaning against the stone wall, unconscious. He did not know what had happened last night, but he roughly understood that if not for her, he would probably have died. This girl was an elf. Although humans and demons walked different paths, his relationship with the demi-humans had always been extremely close. Let alone the fact that this girl had once saved him, he would not abandon her, let alone now. Only, how could he take her away? Chen Chongqing recovered some of his strength and kneeled in front of the white-clothed girl. He extended his hand and made a few gestures, but he felt that it was somewhat inappropriate. In such a tense moment, he would not be like those pedantic gentlemen of virtue who still had to worry about the difference between men and women. It was just that he truly did not have any experience in this aspect. Grab her by her belt and carry her in his hands? Hold her by the crook of her arm and walk together? Carry her horizontally in his arms? In the end, the simplest method was still the most reliable. He directly carried her on his back and used his 2 hands to support her thighs. He carried her out of the cave and observed his surroundings. Stepping on the fallen leaves of the forest, he slowly walked towards the foothills. He was very clear about the geography of the Garden of Zhou. He knew that as long as he continued forward, he would be able to reach the mountainside Whispering Wood. However, before he had even reached the turning point of the mountain path, he stopped. Note: it's really hard for me not to think of Long Qing. In addition, I did not hesitate to write the word on in the title, not an. This means that, in this plot, I want to make an enormous article. This represents my determination, and also represents the length of this plot, with its various ups and downs. I'm very much looking forward to it. However, I have something to do tomorrow, so there's only 1 chapter. Chapter 291. Time seemed to flow without stopping, but in reality it was very slow. From the moment Su Yorong had brought him into the forest to the end of this dangerous battle, not too much time had passed. The morning sun of the Garden of Zhou was still not far above the horizon. The morning wind and the morning light fell into the forest, slicing it into pieces of various shapes. They slowly swept up the fallen leaves on the ground, producing rustling sounds and emitting various kinds of light. Chen Chongqing gazed into the distance in silence. He did not have Zheshio's natural sensitivity to danger, nor did he have Su Yorong's ability to use the fated star plate to deduce the dangers ahead. He did not see any figures in the distant morning light, nor did he sense any danger, much less any enemies. However, he felt that it was too quiet. Yes, quiet was not a sufficient reason, but he felt that something was wrong. Of the 3,000 great Daos, he only cultivated the path of following his heart. Those demon beauties were definitely still pursuing him in the Garden of Zhou. He might even encounter a sinister and terrifying human cultivator like that old freak. However, he did not have the ability to protect himself at all. He could only believe in his own intuition, believe in the only Tao that he had cultivated for 10-odd years. As a result, he did not hesitate at all. He turned around and walked towards the other side of the forest. His expression was somewhat hurried, but his steps could not be hurried. This was because he had not recovered from his heavy injuries, and he still had to carry the white-clothed girl on his back. More importantly, his body was currently much colder than usual. His breathing and heartbeat were at least a third slower than usual. The frost on his eyebrows and temples had reappeared, and the dew on his clothes had condensed into countless tiny snowflakes. After being brushed by the morning wind, they quickly condensed again, and then were brushed off by the morning wind. They fluttered behind him, leaving behind a clear trail in the forest. Not long after he left the forest, Nank and the zither-playing old man arrived with a chili chi. Her gaze followed the traces of frost on the fallen leaves into the distance. Her gaze was extremely sharp. With just a casual glance, she was able to obtain enough information from the traces of frost. Chen Chongqing had already woken up and was currently fleeing with Su Yorong on his back. His injuries had clearly not healed, and his footsteps were somewhat sluggish. A hint of confusion appeared between her rather wide eyes. According to what her two maids had said, Chen Chongqing had suffered extremely heavy injuries last night and was on the verge of death. How could he have recovered in such a short amount of time? At the same time, her spiritual sense sensed the existence of Bai Hai's corpse in the cave, but she didn't have the time to pay attention to what had just happened. She stretched out her two arms into the air beside her. The two demon beauties turned into two beams of clear light and disappeared without a trace. A pair of green wings appeared behind her, and with a gust of wind, she disappeared into the forest. The zither-playing old man looked out of the forest and confirmed that the mysterious and dangerous grassland was not far away. He could not help but frown, guessing what might happen next. However, he had no other choice but to follow. The forest was the shore, and in front of the shore was a swamp. Green reeds occupied the entire view, as if they were going to reach the horizon. But in fact, beyond these reeds was the grassland. That cold aura helped Chen Chongqing suppress his injuries, but at the same time, it also caused his metabolism to rapidly decrease. At this moment, his heartbeat and breathing were too slow, so naturally, he also walked very slowly. It took him a long time to reach here. He didn't know that not long ago, Su Yorong had carried him out of the reeds. He only knew that if he continued forward, he might accidentally enter that terrifying grassland. But he had no other choice. He could only follow his heart and walk back to the wetland along the path he came from. His body walked in the water, bringing out a thin layer of ice. As soon as he walked into the reeds, he didn't even have time to consider whether he should risk going forward or turn around. The sound of the wind coming from the shore told him that he didn't need to think anymore. A cold breeze appeared, and the green light stole the color of all the reeds and trees. A little girl with an indifferent expression appeared on the shore. She looked at him expressionlessly, as if she was looking at an ant. Chen Chongqing looked at her disheveled hair, her blood-stained clothes, and especially her eyes and brows. He stared blankly, as if he had seen something and was rather surprised. In addition, he did not grasp the hilt of his dagger, because he knew that the difference in strength between him and this demon expert was too great. Fighting was meaningless, so he said nothing and appeared very calm. He had always been very calm and steady. No matter what major event he encountered, he would never become depressed, nor would he panic. This characteristic of his personality allowed him to possess a temperament that far exceeded his age, and at the same time, it often surprised others. Su Yorong was like this, and Nank was also like this. She did not think that this was the youth rumored to be deeply doted on by the Pope. She asked, "You are Chen Chongqing?" Chen Chongqing had never seen her before, nor did he know that this little girl was the demon lord's most beloved daughter. It was just that yesterday by the lake, he had heard Zhixio mention that name. From Zhixio's expression at the time, he was very sure that this little girl was very frightening. Similarly, he did not know that her target was the white-clothed girl on his back. He believed that she had come to kill him. Apart from being vigilant, he also felt somewhat childishly happy. Not so long ago, that unremarkable young Taoist priest from the countryside of Xining village had already matured to the point where he was viewed as a true target by those terrifying figures of the demon race. As he thought this, he asked in reply, "You are Nank?" This was the first time that Chen Chongqing had met Nank, and it was also the first time that Nank had met him. In the following years, they would separately represent the humans and demons, meeting on many different battlefields, and then fighting and killing each other. Some stories that were not interesting, but would only make one feel tired, would occur. Not just once, Nank had thought back to that morning when she first met him. Every time, she would feel a faint sense of regret, thinking that if she had been a little more decisive at that time and not listened to his nonsense, perhaps she really would have killed him on the spot. Then there would not have been any of those subsequent stories and troubles. Time always moved in a single direction. The current Nank could not possibly know what would happen in the future. Her attention was naturally still on Su Yorong's body, even though she was clearly unconscious. As for Chen Chongqing, he was just a person she was conversing with. "Put her down and I'll spare your life." As she said these words, Nank's expression was still indifferent, but the two maids by her side were rather shocked. They thought to themselves, what's wrong with their master? She's actually negotiating with a human, and if she just let Chen Chongqing go like this, then wouldn't their desperate battle yesterday by the lake have been completely meaningless? The reason for this was because they did not know that Nank had also suffered heavy injuries in the battle at the peak of Sunset Valley last night. More importantly, Nank saw very clearly that Chen Chongqing was standing in the reeds, and could jump into the lake at any time. That seemingly clear and empty lake water actually had a dividing line, and on the other side of the line was the grassland. Nank did not wish for Chen Chongqing to feel that he had already reached a dead end, and thus jump into the lake. This was because even she had a lot of fear towards that vast and mysterious grassland. Hearing Nank's words, Chen Chongqing was somewhat shocked. Only now did he know that her target was not him, but of course he could not leave Su Yorong behind and run for his life. At this moment, he did not know that the white-clothed girl on his back was Su Yorong. He was also not like Su Yorong, who was used to carrying many things on his back as he traveled. He had only promised her that he would not leave her behind. "I can't do it." He looked at Nank and said very honestly. Then, he looked at her expression and hesitated to speak. Nank's somewhat wooden and indifferent gaze became somewhat confused. She did not understand where Chen Chongqing's somewhat strange expression and reaction came from. She asked, "What's wrong?" Chen Chongqing thought about it, then said, "You're sick." Hearing these words, Nank's eyebrows suddenly jumped up. She was like a little girl who had gone to the mountains early in the morning to painstakingly gather a large basket of pigweed that had been snatched away by the drunkard next door. She was very angry, and her voice immediately rose. "You're the one who's sick. Your entire family is sick. Everyone in the Orthodox Academy is sick." The somewhat childish, yet extremely cold and incomparably angry yell of the little girl reverberated through the quiet reeds. The two maids said nothing. They did not know why their master had suddenly become so angry, and why she had such a big reaction to Chen Chongqing's words. Hearing the incessant curses from the shore, Chen Chongqing felt somewhat helpless. He thought to himself, if you did not insist on asking, why would I say it? However, anger and sensitivity represented that his judgment was true. Chen Chongqing suddenly thought that perhaps he could use this matter to exchange for a chance to leave. After Nank's angry and shrill voice gradually grew softer, he very seriously said, "I don't know if your demon spies in the capital have grasped the origins of my sect. If they do, then you should know that my medical skills are not bad." The expression in Nank's eyes was exceptionally cold. She looked at him like she was looking at a dead man. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Chen Chongqing silently organized the words in his mind, ensuring that even demons could understand. He continued, "There's a problem with your bloodline. If it is not treated as soon as possible, when the soul in your body awakens a second time, there might be a backlash. Even if you can preserve your life, you might become a retard." Nank's face was somewhat pale. It was unknown whether it was because of the remnants of last night's battle, or because of what he had said. However, her voice was still indifferent and calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." As the demon princess, Black Robe's only disciple, even if the Garden of Zhou was destroyed before her eyes, it would probably not cause the slightest change in her expression. However, she was still young, and she thought that she had concealed her true emotions extremely well. She did not know that Chen Chongqing, her maids, and the zither-playing old man had all heard the problem. If Chen Chongqing's words had no effect on her, why would she repeat the same words twice? Was the princess sick? And it seemed to be a very troublesome illness? The faces of the two maids instantly became incomparably pale. They thought to themselves, if they knew this secret, what kind of fate would await them? The zither-playing old man's complexion also became somewhat unsightly. As I said yesterday, there will only be one chapter today. Recently, there have been some matters at home, and an important event has been forced to be postponed, so there might be fewer updates. Also, there are a few more important matters that I need to report to everyone. First of all, it's Banlon, not Banlon. In the first few chapters, everything I wrote was wrong. I really didn't pay attention when I was writing. Thank you, Lord Leader, for your correction. Also, some of my friends might have already discovered that you can now also read Choose Heaven Chronicles. Of course, it's in the bookstore, and I don't have the authority to operate it yet. Here, I would like to say hello to my old friends who still don't know that I've switched to Tencent Literature and might still be staying at Qidian. For the past 2 days, the sub-editors and many readers have been asking me about subscriptions. Actually, my attitude is very clear. Everyone can subscribe anywhere. I only have one request for my readers, and that is to subscribe to the original version. As long as it's the original version, it doesn't matter where you subscribe. I will shout for recommendation votes, I will be very grateful for monthly votes, and I will be very grateful for tips, but I will also be very embarrassed. I can only subscribe. This is the only and serious request I have for everyone. Of course, I will still be operating on the side of Genesis, such as the book review section or something else. Also, there is absolutely no need to repeatedly subscribe on both sides. Everyone also doesn't have to worry about the problem of not being able to get monthly votes if you subscribe on one side. What I write is definitely worth the money you spend on subscribing, but I can't guarantee that it will be worth more. Therefore, please choose for your convenience. As long as you subscribe, I will be grateful no matter what. P.S. A few days ago, I did a Q&A in the book review section and WeChat. The sub-moderators have already put in a lot of effort to place the annoyingly annoying book review section in Genesis. I will also post it in the book later. Finally, thank you, everyone. Please vote for me.